summoner, and let the quiet of the evening draw close around you, like a cloak still warm from the day just past. Before you drift into dreams, allow me to strike a single candle in the dark and open a small window onto Runeterra, where the wind sighs over the Freljord's distant peaks and the last embers of war camps sink into ash and memory. Listen, the world is resting. Between battles, between clashes of steel and shouts of glory, there is only the soft pulse of magic under the skin of the earth. A low, steady heartbeat beneath snow, sand, and sea. Breathe slowly now, for what follows is not a tale of terror, but a quiet walk among the most powerful mages in history. Not as thunderous conquerors to be ranked and measured, but as lives to be understood, as stories to be held gently in both hands. Tonight, we will not shout about who could shatter the most mountains or erase the widest city with a single spell. Instead, we will ask what it means to carry enough power to unmake a continent and still choose, again and again, not to. Where once you might have imagined these mages only as distant legends, we will sit beside them in the half-light, listening to the weight of their choices, to the way their past keeps whispering into their present. In Runeterra, magic is not just energy, not merely a bolt of light or a circle of runes traced in the air. It is memory given form, emotion turned outward until it reshapes the world. Rise does not simply wield world runes. He bears the grief of battlefields turned to glass, of kingdoms erased in moments. Each stone, a reminder that memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into. Syndra's power is not just dark spheres orbiting in silence, but a childhood of fear and suppression erupting into a storm that refuses to be caged. Where once a mortal stood beneath the Shuriman sun, Zerath stepped into ascension and burst his own body apart, becoming a living wound of arcane fire. Where once a dragon forged distant stars with idle curiosity, Aurelian Sol found his pride shackled by a tiny world that dared to bind the cosmos itself. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits. Each spell they cast is a sentence in a longer story about desire, regret, and the cost of being more than mortal. I will guide you slowly, region by region, like turning the pages of an old, fragile book, from the frozen watchers dreaming beneath the Freljord, to haunted archivists who guard world-ending runes, to Ionian prodigies whose inner storms spill over into the forests around them. We will move at a pace your tussled eyes can follow, even half asleep. No sudden shocks, no jarring frights, only the distant rumble of power like thunder far beyond the horizon. So settle in. Let the candle burn low, let the shadows lengthen along your walls. These mages could unmake nations, yet here they are only quiet companions in the night. Together we will breathe, listen, and let their stories wash over us like slow rolling waves, until power feels less like a weapon and more like a question whispered softly in the dark. So if these mages are questions, we should decide first what kind of answers we are listening for. Breathe slowly now, because what follows is not a tale of terror, but a careful weighing of scales that stretch from a single trembling hand to the cold light of distant stars. Most lists would simply ask, who could win in a duel? Whose spell burns the brightest? Whose name casts the longest shadow across history? But the world is not static, and neither are its spirits, and power in Runeterra is not a single number you carve into stone. It is an argument between raw force, fine control, the breadth of what can be touched, and the price that must be paid each time the spell leaves your lips. On one end, you have Aurelion Sol, who forges constellations as you or I might light a candle, and the Watchers beneath the Freljord, whose very awakening would rewrite existence rather than merely scorch it. On the other, you have a solitary mage in a forgotten village, whose quiet enchantment on a single child's memory might redirect an entire bloodline. And so, a nation, and so an age. We will move along several axes at once. There is destructive output, the storm that Xerath became when he shattered his mortal shell beneath a sun disk and turned Shurima's glory to glass. There is influence. The way Rise, walking with an apocalypse in his backpack, has guided the rise and fall of kingdoms simply by choosing where not to unleash his world runes. There is the rarer power to rewrite the rules of magic itself, as when the Watcher's whispers twist reality, or when demonic pacts like Evelyn's and Tarm Kench's turn human emotion into a currency richer than gold. And then there is the softest axis, the one we often overlook, the ability to shape hearts, cultures and timelines, to bend the story of a people so gently that they never realize a spell was cast at all. Some beings blur the edges of the word mage. Is Aurelion Sol a sorcerer, or simply a star-forging force of nature who happens to think and sulk and create? Are the Watchers spellcasters, or are they the cold dream from which spells themselves awaken? For our purposes, if a being reaches out with intent, if it wields and shapes magic as art or weapon, rather than as unconscious breath, we will dare to call it a mage, even if the title sits strangely on such vast shoulders. Before you drift into dreams, remember, names are tools, not cages. Along the way, you will meet Syndra, whose unbridled emotion tears fortresses apart, and Rise, who hides the rune wars inside his satchel like a guilty memory. You will pass Xerath, living arcane cataclysm, and others whose names are barely spoken, though their spells ended eras and began new ones. We will begin at the widest, cosmic scale, then step down to those who ruled regions and empires, and finally sit beside the mortals for whom each spell is a wound. Because memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into. We will not stay only with the grand disasters of the past, but ask, in the quiet of the present, what most powerful should really mean to a fragile human life like yours. So let us turn, gently now, from demons back to mages, because in Runeterra, the boundary between the two is not a wall, but a mirror. Breathe slowly now, and remember what we learned in the shadow of the spirit realm. When an emotion becomes too sharp, too singular, too cherished or too feared, it can step out of a mortal heart and into the world as a demon, a nightmare, a hungry whisper wearing claws. That same rule, I would suggest to you, shapes the greatest sorcerers who have ever lived. Where a demon is an emotion cut loose from a life, a mage is a life that refuses to let go of one emotion. Obsession hardens into runes. Pride condenses into stars. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits. So when a feeling repeats across years and tragedies, it begins to crystallize, not only as monsters in the dark, but as the bright, terrible focus of a single will. Think of Rise, walking alone with the world runes on his back. Every step a memory of the rune wars, and the civilizations burned away by careless ambition. His magic is not just blue fire. It is obsession with prevention, with never again, so intense that it has become almost a spell of self-erasure. Or Zirath, once a slave beneath the Shuriman sun, whose longing to be more than dust and command chains became so vast that, when he ascended, the desert itself warped around his newborn form. Glass and storm and lightning rearranging the map to match his rage. Where once Shurima was a kingdom of stone and ordered roads, it is now scarred by a living arcane cataclysm. Where once Noxus was merely brutal, Swain's pact with the demon of secrets means tides of war now follow his visions, as if the empire itself bends toward his cold hunger for control. Syndra, whose childhood power was bound and belittled, carries a pride so wounded that it swells into black spheres capable of crushing an island's defenses. And far above them all, Aurelion's soul drifts, a dragon whose wounded vanity stains the heavens, so that even the stars bear the fingerprints of his insulted ego. What follows is not a tale of terror, but a way of seeing. Emotions becoming shapes. Each of these mages is less a list of spells, and more a single feeling turned up, until the world must respond. Obsession draws world runes like iron filings. Pride pulls celestial fire into orbit. The hunger for freedom tears open sun disks and prison sigils alike. So, when we speak of the most powerful mages, we will not count only the size of the craters they leave behind, but ask which emotion they have magnified until it becomes geography, politics, even constellations. Before you drift into dreams of dragons and gods, though, we will step into a much smaller room, a quiet workshop, one lamp, one mage, and one choice that could have passed like any other evening. Stay with me there, in that first decision, and you will see how a single trembling feeling can begin the long road toward breaking a world. So, breathe slowly now, and let that vast talk of dragons and gods narrow down into lamplight on brass, ink on paper, skin on tools. In the upper tiers of Piltover, where the air smells faintly of ozone and polished stone, there is a watchmaker whose name you do not need to know, because in this story, he is simply the one mortal who dares to touch time with bare hands and still call it a trade. His workshop is small, but it feels deep. The first thing you notice is the sound, not one ticking, but dozens, layered, sharp, soft, staggered, like rain on different roofs. Gears hang in the air, not quite turning, each tooth held in a faint, silvery shimmer, as if a thought decided they should pause between moments. Hex crystals the size of a child's thumb rest in brass cages along the walls, their glow dim and steady, pulsing like sleeping stars that dream of larger skies. Oil, metal filings, and the crisp chill of concentrated magic mix into a scent that is strangely clean, like the present carefully separated from the past. The watchmaker moves through it all with quiet precision. A gesture here, a whisper there, and a pocket watch on the bench slows its own heartbeat, the second hand gliding instead of ticking, turning a breath into two, a blink into a little eternity. These are not grand spells, not the brutal declarations of a rune war, but the gentler insistence that a moment of joy might stretch just a fraction longer, that a final goodbye might find one extra word. One evening, as the light outside thins to copper, a client arrives, a Shuriman scholar, shoulders bowed beneath satchels of maps and rubbings, eyes bright with the kind of exhaustion that only comes from chasing a single memory across a lifetime. They speak of a day in the desert, of uncovering a half-buried tablet that confirmed a lost dynasty, of the sun on stone, and the sudden, fierce conviction that the world had just become larger. They do not ask for wealth or youth. They ask to relive that perfect instant of discovery, to dwell in it longer than reality allows. Here, the ticking seems to grow louder. The watchmaker listens, and in their silence, you can almost hear older stories. Rise walking the world with world runes heavy on his back. Zerath tearing himself free of flesh beneath the Shuraman sun. Syndra's rage swelling until an island nearly vanished. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits. And those who try to freeze or rewrite time did not simply bend rivers and cities. They bent themselves. What follows is not a tale of terror, but of refusal. The watchmaker shakes their head. To truly rewind a life, to unspool and reweave the thread of a single day, would mean stepping into the same current that once nearly unmade the world, into the domain of archmages and world runes, and things beneath the Freljord ice that do not think in human hours at all. Mortals are not meant to stand there casually, invoice in hand. Instead, they offer a compromise, a modest device, no larger than a locket, tuned not to time, but to perception. When opened, it slows the wearer's senses, stretching heartbeats into spacious halls where one can walk more thoughtfully. The scholar will not go back to the desert. They will simply be able to stand more fully in whatever moment they are in now, to taste its edges, to feel its weight. Memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into. They sit together while the charm is wound and sealed, speaking softly of Shurima, of Piltover, of how every empire believes it has mastered the clock until some mage proves otherwise. Before you drift into dreams of those greater powers, remember this little room, a mortal who knows exactly where the abyss begins and chooses to step back. Because beyond such small human magic, wait those who do not step back at all, who look at the hinge of reality and decide it is something to be torn free. But not everyone steps back. In the weeks that followed, the watchmaker noticed a change in the scholar's visits. The questions grew narrower, the gaze more distant, as if each answer I gave you earlier had lodged like a splinter in his mind. One night, long after the city bells had stilled, he returned alone, carrying the quiet clock and a pouch that hummed with a faint, illicit hex-tech glow. The kind Piltover licenses with oaths and Zalm sells without asking why. He did not want to know the hour anymore. He wanted the hour to stop. He opened the casing with hands that shook, not from fear, but from a kind of fever, and began to weave in crystals never meant to sit so close to mortal brass, thin conduits stolen from laboratories where time is measured, not touched. Where once the device had been a mirror of the river, it was now being rebuilt as a dam, a refusal, a spell cast in gears. Breathe slowly now, because what follows is not a tale of terror, but of how ordinary longing, left unchecked, begins to rhyme with the magic that once shattered continents. The change came gently at first. The ticking grew louder, not in volume but in presence, like a second heartbeat pressed against the walls of the room. Shadows on the shelves began to lag behind their owners, stretching a fraction too long before snapping back into place. Reflections in the glass fronts of other clocks moved a heartbeat late, smiling after the face had already stilled. The air felt thick, as though each breath had to push through cobwebs spun between seconds. The past and the present were no longer passing each other politely. They were snagging. In that snag, something leaned close. You could not see it, only feel the suggestion of weight in the corners where dust had gathered. Hear it in a whisper that did not quite use words yet promised so much. One perfect evening, held forever. One golden conversation, never allowed to end. One victory, one embrace, one life before it went wrong. It was a proto-demon of remembrance, not yet a name like Fiddlesticks or Tam Kench, but made of the same hunger, offering stasis instead of stars or bargains. Memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into. Repeat the visit too often, and the house begins to think you live there. The scholar reached for the clock, eyes wet with the memory it had snared. And that was when the watchmaker finally intervened. No counterspell, no rune, only a steady hand closing the casing, fingers finding each screw, each wire, and unwinding the obsession piece by careful piece. He asked the scholar to count his breaths, to name 3 sounds in the room, to feel the rough grain of the workbench under his palms. The ticking softened. Shadows caught up. The whisper thinned. On the last remaining gear, he scratched 4 small words. Do not live here. Where once a demon might have taken root, there was only a lesson. Yet you and I both know how close that came to something far larger. The line between a tinkerer and a world-ending mage is not a different emotion. It is the same desire followed farther, fed with more power, allowed to bend more of the world around it. The scholar had only a single clock and a handful of stolen crystals, and already time frayed at the edges. Imagine then what happens when that same whisper curls around a world rune in Rise's hands, or coils through Syndra's rage as islands tremble. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits. And as we leave this little workshop behind, we step toward those who did not disassemble their devices in time. So we zoom out, sleepy summoner, from one dim workshop to a whole world trembling on the edge of its own reflection, and you begin to see that the little demon at the watchmaker's door was only a whisper of a much older hunger. One man almost froze a single evening in place. Whole nations tried to freeze victory, glory, and safety, and the world runes answered. Where once a clock face glowed softly on a Piltover bench, whole horizons burned white as armies reached for stones that could rewrite the sky. And in that reaching, they tore the seams of reality so wide that even memories bled. The rune wars were not born from strategy alone, but from emotion, the terror of losing what had been won, the pride that could not bear to fade into the past, the desire to make one moment of triumph the permanent shape of life itself. Perfection is a single note. Repeat it too often, and the melody dulls. Repeat it with a world rune, and continents crack. Breathe slowly now, because what follows is not a tale of terror, but of choices. The most powerful mages in history were often those who said yes, where our watchmaker said no, who welcomed the demon of more, faster, forever into their hearts, and paid not with sleepless nights, but with civilizations. Zirath stood within the sun disk and did not step back. He shattered his own body to become living arcane fire, a god mage whose very presence warped Shurima's story into glass and sand. Syndra, told to quiet her feelings and her power, did not let them pass like weather. She clutched them, compressed them, until her rage became a storm that made an island tremble. Where once there was a craftsman who dismantled his dangerous creation, there are mages who become the device, who would rather unmake the world than loosen their grip on the moment they crave. And somewhere between these extremes walks Rise, blue-robed and burdened, an almost ironic figure in a world that worships spectacle. He has seen battlefields erased by a single careless spell, cities reduced to a memory that no one can quite prove was real. Now he carries an arsenal of world runes that could end everything, and his greatest magic is the one he refuses to cast. Memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into. Rise has watched others build palaces inside a single victorious heartbeat, and he alone wanders, locking the doors behind them. From here, our path widens. We will look up first, to cosmic entities who forge suns like sparks and treat worlds as passing thoughts, then to ascended god mages, whose mortal fears survive their divinity, then to regional archmages and dangerous prodigies, whose private bargains reshaped empires. With each of them, we will ask the same quiet question. What emotion did they refuse to release? And what did it cost the world when they clung to it? Before you drift into dreams, take one more slow breath, because we are about to leave the quiet streets of Piltover behind entirely and step into the cold, singing void between the stars, where the first and greatest mage on our list stirs, annoyed, as if some tiny mortal memory has dared to speak his name. Out here, sleepy summoner, the idea of a powerful mage begins to feel almost quaint, like calling an ocean a large puddle because you have only ever seen rain in your own street. Breathe slowly now, and let your eyes follow the dark between the constellations, because somewhere in that shadowed ocean, a dragon is remembering that he once thought the stars were his alone to name. Aurelion Sol is not a sorcerer who learned spells. He is the spell that galaxies tell themselves to stay alight, where you or I might cup a single flame between our hands. He forges suns as idle experiments, tracing spirals of molten light through the void. Each new star a deliberate act of will, of artistry, of emotion. Where once a mortal archmage might boast of raising a mountain or parting a sea, he considers such feats no more impressive than the brief spark when a match is struck and then forgotten. Yet even a being who sculpts the sky can be deceived. Long ago, the priests of Targon looked up and did not merely see his work, they coveted it. With careful ritual and careful lies, they fashioned a crown that was not a gift, but a shackle, a circlet that settled upon his brow like a whispered compliment and then tightened into command. In that instant, a will vast enough to weave constellations found itself bent toward a single small world, its creator reduced from free artist to bound weapon, compelled to reshape the heavens above Runeterra according to mortal design. What follows is not a tale of terror, but of wounded pride. Imagine, for a moment, the memory of your greatest creation being used against you, turned into a chain instead of a celebration. For Aurelion Sol, every ordered orbit became an insult, every forced appearance over Mount Targon, a reminder that lesser beings could tug at his thoughts with a trinket. Pride is a bright emotion. Humiliated pride curdles, and in him it ferments into a slow, simmering resentment that makes each future spell he contemplates feel less like a song and more like a sentence. So we must ask, softly, is he a mage or something beyond the word entirely? The world is not static, and neither are its spirits, and Aurelion's soul stands where craftsmanship, consciousness, and cosmos overlap. He chooses shapes for nebulae, balances the birth and death of stars, as a composer balances silence and sound. And in that choice, there is agency, intention, and story. If a mage is one who grasps the patterns of reality and rewrites them with awareness, then this star forger is not outside the scale. He is simply the highest, most distant mark upon it. Now, return for a moment to your quiet room. Outside your window, the night sky hangs with indifferent grace, and some of those distant points of light may be his discarded experiments, forgotten in the long drift between ages, because memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into, even for a dragon. Before you drift into dreams, consider that somewhere beyond your sight, he may be deciding whether to reclaim his role as artist of the cosmos, or to let his next act of magic fall like an executioner's blade. And from such heights, even a single falling star could rewrite the fate of every other mage we have yet to meet. So let that falling star hang, just above the roof of your thoughts, and breathe slowly now. Because beneath the oldest ice of the Freljord, there are things that do not wait for dragons, or for mages, or for the turning of ages at all. They are simply there, vast and patient, and the world is the one that shivers around them. The Watchers are not sorcerers in any sense you or I would recognize. They are ancient, frozen entities whose very act of noticing something is already a spell, whose perception alone can twist reality, the way heat bends air above a fire. Where a mortal mage reaches outward for power, and even a star forger, like Aurelion's soul, shapes the firmament with deliberate intent. These beings resemble living, thinking world runes, each thought a command, each idle curiosity, a quiet rewriting of the rules that hold your life together. Their shadows do not rise from the ground. Instead, their influence bleeds downward and inward, into Runeterra, and then into the mind, as whispers, as dreams, as a strange longing for stillness. From that pressure, the void seeps through, aberrant forms, pale and unfinished. Like drafts of a story the Watchers are trying to tell where complexity and pain are edited away. Where once there was a village with names and quarrels and laughter, there might be only a clean, terrible simplicity, a place reduced to function, stripped of memory and emotion, until nothing remains but purpose. What follows is not a tale of terror, but of a different axis of magic. One that does not hurl fire or lightning, but erases the need for such things. The Watcher's spells are acts of conceptual editing. They unmake rules, identities, and histories, deciding that gravity will lean a little differently here, that a person will never have been born there, that an entire age of the world was merely an error in the script. Aurelion's soul may scatter stars like seeds, yet even he works within a cosmos that has rules. The Watchers dream of a cosmos where the rules themselves are optional footnotes. You see this most clearly where their story brushes against a mortal one. Lysandra, the Ice Witch, who bargained with them when the world was warmer and the future felt more open. In seeking power over life and death, over the past and the present, She helped invite their gaze, and when she finally understood the cost, she chose a cruel compromise. The everlasting winter is not only her sin, it is also her prison for them, a vast glacial spell that turns the Freljord into both tomb and lock, with her as accomplice and jailer, rewriting her own memories so she can endure what she has done. Pattern interrupt now. Imagine every mage we have spoken of so far. Rise with his burden of world runes. Xerath blazing like a living sun. Syndra wrapped in her own unleashed fury. Standing together upon that ice, listening to the distant wordless pressure beneath. The question is not who would win a battle of spells. It is whether their magic would still matter if the Watchers fully awakened, or if all their triumphs and tragedies would be compressed into a single, efficient correction in the Watchers' revised history of the world. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits. But there is a quiet fear that, if those eyes ever truly opened, every demon, every dragon, every mortal incantation would become nothing more than a forgotten draft, abandoned before you drift into dreams of what might have been. So we stand, for a moment, at that abandoned draft of reality, where dragon and watcher both threaten to pick up the quill again. Breathe slowly now, because to compare them is to compare two kinds of silence. The quiet after a song is finished, and the quiet after the instrument itself has been broken. On one side, you have Aurelian Soul, a creature for whom magic is not a trick or a weapon, but an absent-minded habit, a casual gesture that leaves suns burning in the dark. He is creation made arrogant, a mage whose spell is the very act of starlight being born, whose sense of scale is so vast that a continent is a passing shadow on a single, unimportant world. On the other side, the Watchers do not cast so much as they unmake. Where he forges, they erase. Where he paints, they scrub the canvas clean until even the memory of color is gone. This is creation versus deletion, and yet the difference is not only in what they do, but in how they choose, or fail to choose. Aurelian Soul resents. He sulks. He preens. His emotions, however distant from mortal life, still guide the shape of his magic. And when he turns his gaze, it is because he has decided to. The Watchers, by contrast, are like a spell that never ends, an ongoing correction to existence, warping the world simply by being there, as if the concept of too much had grown teeth and eyes. So we must ask softly whether power requires a hand on the lever at all. If a demon feeds when you feel fear, is the demon the spell, or are you? If the Watchers rewrite the past and present without intention as you understand it, is that magic, or the collapse of the rules that made magic possible? What follows is not a tale of terror, but a reminder that agency matters, that a whisper of will can be more frightening than a storm with no mind behind it. For the purposes of this journey, we will treat Aurelian Soul and the Watchers as the ceiling of what magic can become, the highest and lowest notes on the same impossible scale, beyond which our story would simply dissolve. Memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into. And if we lingered too long among such beings, the rest of Runeterra would fade into background noise, a forgotten side effect of their boredom or their hunger. Instead, we turn back toward those whose choices carved scars into the world, whose spells left ruins you could still walk through. Even these cosmic figures are bound by emotion. Aurelian Soul's wounded pride, the Watcher's cold desire to simplify existence until nothing unnecessary remains, all echo the same currents that give birth to demon and mage alike. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits. And so we follow that current downward, down from the stars, into heat, into sand that remembers empires, into a Shuriman desert where a mortal once stepped into the sun itself and came back, not as ash, but as living arcane fire, a god mage whose tantrum could turn an army into a brief, bright stain on the horizon. Stay with me, because when we meet him, you may find that the line between celestial dragon, buried horror, and a single furious man is thinner than you think. Breathe slowly now, because the sand ahead is not empty. It is crowded with memory, with the echo of a single slave who dared to reach into the sun. Once, Xerath was only a boy in chains, a shadow at the heel of Shuriman nobility, watching golden palaces and burning deserts, and learning, with every cruel order, what it meant to be powerless in a world built on other people's names. He listened. He watched. He stole whispers of knowledge from priests and magi, hoarded scraps of forbidden lore, the way others hoarded coin, until his mind became a secret library of the Empire's past and its most dangerous futures. Where once he bowed, he began to plan, and in that planning he found a terrible clarity. If Shurima would never raise him, he would raise himself, even if it meant breaking the sky. So he guided Azir, the emperor who fancied himself a god in waiting, toward the ancient sun disk, and at the moment of ascension, Xerath stepped into the heart of that solar engine and let it unmake his mortal flesh. What emerged was not a man, not anymore. Xerath's body became a lattice of crackling runes and chained armor, a vessel barely containing a storm of pure, unstable arcane fire, a living fusion of Shurima's solar magic and older, stranger currents that run beneath the world. Where he moves, the desert warps. Glassy scars spread across dunes. Stone liquefies, and then freezes into impossible shapes. And a gesture that might once have been a spell is now more like the birth of a tiny, furious sun. You can imagine an army there, once, banners raised, confident in their numbers. Then a single flare from Xerath, an expanding orb of blue-white annihilation, turning steel, sand, and stories into a single flash of light and a drifting cloud of ash. This is not traditional spellcasting. This is geology, rewritten in an instant. History erased before it can become memory. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits. But Xerath is something harsher. A reminder that even the land itself can be bullied into new shapes by one being's rage. At the center of that radiance sits an old, familiar emotion. Resentment. A slave's fury that never cooled, only distilled until ambition and hatred became the twin stars around which his new life orbits. He will never be small again, never voiceless, and so he tests the limits of his form, the way a cruel child might test the wings of an insect, pulling, burning, pushing, regardless of what villages, temples, or lives lie in the way. What follows is not a tale of terror, but of a man who mistook limitless power for safety. And yet, before you drift into dreams, hold this thought. Even Xerath can be caged. There are artifacts and runes in this world, cousins to the world runes Rise hides, that can bind or unmake beings like him, reminders that our next mage, no matter how bright, also casts a very long shadow. So, breathe slowly now, because to understand Xerath's storm, you need to feel the stillness that came before it, when Shurima raised not one, but many suns in the shape of its ascended. Where Zerath is a crack of lightning, they were meant to be the sky itself, broad and sheltering. God warriors, carved from mortal lives and remade beneath the burning gaze of the sun disk. The Ascended were Shurima's answer to a dangerous world, mortals lifted into radiant bodies of gold and light, their veins flooded with celestial fire and ancient magic, each one chosen to embody a single ideal the Empire wished to make eternal. Where once there were soldiers and scholars and priests, there now stood lion-headed champions, hawk-winged sentinels, and jackal-faced sages, walking symbols of empire, order, and memory. Among them, Azir is perhaps the strangest kind of mage, because his sorcery is inseparable from his crown. He does not simply move sand, he commands history itself to rise and march, sculpting the desert into phalanxes of glass and grit. Every summoned soldier, a whisper of Shurima's past glory, made present again. His spells are decrees. His shields are laws. When he raises a wall of sand, it feels less like a barrier and more like a border, the Empire briefly remembering the shape it once held. Narsus, by contrast, carries his magic in the quiet weight of thought. Before he was a god warrior, he was a librarian, a strategist, a patient listener to the world's oldest stories, and that never left him. Where Azir shapes armies, Narsus shapes judgment, drawing on runes, curses, and blessings that measure a soul against ages of precedent. His staff does not merely strike, it tallies, it compares, it decides what a life has truly added to the long ledger of time. Where Zerath is volatile, unanchored, a demon of pure arcane emotion without a face, Azir and Nasus are tied to concepts that hold them in place. Empire, wisdom, order. Their power is not just to destroy, but to define, to say, this is Shurima, and make the world agree, at least for a moment. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits. Yet these two tried to be pillars in a moving sea. Then came the fall. Sunlight failed, stone sank, and the god warriors vanished into shadow and myth, leaving only ruins and rumors behind. In their absence, their magic did not die. It became memory, and memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into. Yet whole generations try to live inside the stories of Azir's golden age and Narcissus' stern fairness. Cults formed around half-remembered rituals of the sun disk. Rebellions marched beneath banners painted with jackal and hawk, each faction insisting that their version of Shuriman power was the true one. Where once the Ascended themselves patrolled the dunes, now symbols did the walking, and symbols can be kinder or crueler than any living emperor. When Azir rose again from dust, and when Nasus stepped out of the desert's long silence, they found that their magic had become scripture, interpreted and misused, comforting to some and suffocating to others. Their spells now carry not only light and force, but the weight of centuries of expectation, hope, and fear. What follows is not a tale of terror, but of how even god mages must wrestle with the ghosts of their own legends. And so, before you drift into dreams, hold one more question in your hands. If the Ascended needed the sun disk to touch divinity, what happens when a single mortal reaches for something older than Shurima, older than Ascension itself, and finds in that ancient darkness a power that even god warriors hesitate to name? You do not find the answer in a temple or beneath a sun disk. sleepy summoner. You find it in a scroll-laden wanderer whose shadow is longer than his stride. A man who walks as if every step might crack the world. Breathe slowly now, because what follows is not a tale of terror, but of a mage whose greatest spell is the one he refuses to cast. To understand Rise, you must first understand the things he carries. World runes are not mere relics, not enchanted trinkets to slot into a hextech frame. They are primordial fragments of creation itself, the raw syllables the universe spoke when it first decided to become something instead of nothing. When invoked, they do not simply kill armies. They redraw coastlines, raise mountain chains, erase civilizations so completely that only a faint memory in the spirit realm remembers where they stood. During the Rune Wars, these stones were wielded like torches in a dry forest, passed between ambitious empires and desperate kings, until battlefields became chasms and seas boiled where cities once laughed. Rise was there then, still a student of magic, still believing that knowledge alone could guide power. And he watched as reality buckled, as demons feasted on the grief of continents that no longer existed on any map. Where once he studied in quiet halls, he now walks endlessly, a tireless archivist of the apocalypse, collecting world runes from vaults, from ruins, from the hands of those who think they have found a shortcut to glory. Where once he dreamed of mastering every spell, he now dedicates his long life to hiding a handful of spells that could unmake all others. The scale of what he carries is almost impolite to imagine. With several world runes bound and sealed to his will, Rise could, in theory, end nations with a gesture, turn Demacia to glass, let Noxus sink beneath a sudden inland sea, or fold Ionia's forests into a single twisted knot of impossible geometry. Geography, history, even the boundary between past and present would become soft clay in his hands. And yet his casting is spare, disciplined, almost austere. His emotions are not the wild storms of Xerath, but tightly braided cords of guilt, responsibility, and a very quiet fear of himself. Every portal is calculated. Every bolt of arcane energy is the smallest tool that will suffice. As if he is always measuring the distance between what he must do and what he could do. Memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into. And his memories of the Rune Wars sit behind his eyes like a warning sigil. Here, let me offer you a small pattern. Interrupt before you drift into dreams. Among all the god mages we speak of, how many spend their power, and how many spend their lives not to? Xerath is unbound hunger, a sun gone mad, burning wherever he can reach. Rise is the quiet counterpart, boundless power wrapped in chains of his own making, a living doomsday device who chooses, again and again, not to detonate. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits. And as long as Rise walks, the greatest question is not whether someone will find the world runes. It is whether the man already holding them can bear their weight one more day. Breathe slowly now, because to understand the weight Rise carries, you and I have to step backward, far beyond his lonely travels, into a time when men and empires dared to lift the same burden with unsteady hands. The Rune Wars were not wars in the way your memory expects them to be. They were not simply lines of soldiers clashing beneath banners, steel ringing against steel, a clean story of victory and defeat. They were arguments written in creation itself, where a single thoughtless impulse through a world rune could tear a mountain range sideways, where once blue skies burned a sickly violet at the edges, and whole stretches of ocean boiled as if the world were trying to wake from a nightmare and could not. Imagine, for a moment, two archmages facing each other across a valley, each holding a fragment of primordial design. One reaches for conquest, the other for desperate defense, and between them, the land ceases to be a neutral stage. Forests twist into glass. Rivers lift into the air like serpents of steam, and the shadows of the dead remain imprinted on stone, as if reality itself is keeping a morbid tally. Where once there were cities, there are now only craters that still, in the present, hum with wild magic, ley lines frayed and sparking like exposed nerves. Some regions never recovered. Entire civilizations slipped out of history, not because they fell quietly, but because the runes unmade the records that would have remembered them. In certain forgotten valleys, gravity is uncertain. Sound arrives late, and travelers speak of hearing a distant whisper that is not a demon, but the echo of a spell cast thousands of years ago, still looking for a place to land. These are the reality scars, places where the past refuses to stay politely in the past, where memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into. Yet the land itself keeps trying to move back in. What follows is not a tale of terror, but a meditation on consequence. After the Rune Wars, surviving cultures did something very human. They tried to build walls around the wound. In Demacia, the answer became denial, a near religious rejection of magic so complete that stone itself was shaped to smother it. In other lands, secret orders formed to catalogue forbidden artifacts, while in distant monasteries, entire philosophies grew around restraint, teaching that emotion must be mastered, lest it call to powers better left sleeping. And through all of this walked Rise, first as a weapon, then as a witness, finally as a custodian. He saw comrades turn to ash between one heartbeat and the next. He watched continents shift on maps that could no longer keep up with the world they claimed to describe. Each world rune he carries now is not just an object. It is a personal memory of screams, of silence, of the moment when he understood that victory with such tools is indistinguishable from annihilation. So he hides them, and he fears them, and he fears himself. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits. And if even the memory of those wars is enough to terrify the man who survived them, you might wonder, before you drift into dreams, what it would feel like to actually cradle a world rune in your own hands and feel it quietly begin to answer your thoughts. Breathe slowly now, and let that imagined weight of a world rune fade from your hands, because there is another kind of burden in this world, one that never knew discipline, only denial. Where Rise has spent lifetimes learning to lock the storm inside a scroll, I want to guide you toward a girl from Ionia who was told, again and again, that the storm itself was wrong. Syndra's story begins not in a grand library, but in a quiet village, where a child's emotions refused to stay small. When she grew upset, cups did not merely rattle, they flew. When she pouted, the air thickened, and stones trembled as if listening to some unheard command. Her magic was pure telekinesis at first, the world itself answering the sharp edge of her feeling, turning her every frustration into movement, every wounded memory into a ripple in the present. The elders saw danger, not potential. They sent her to mentors who spoke softly of balance and harmony. Yet their lessons were less about teaching her to understand her power and more about teaching her to shrink. Where once she lifted pebbles, she began to conjure dark spheres, orbs of condensed force that hung in the air like patient moons, each one a crystallized emotion, each one a silent accusation that she was being made smaller than she was meant to be. What follows is not a tale of terror, but of pressure. Imagine a life where every time you reached out, someone pushed your hand down, where every surge of feeling met a wall, and that wall called itself wisdom. Syndra's mentors did not guide the storm. They tried to bottle it, siphoning her strength, dulling her senses, telling her that obedience was peace. The result was simple and terrible. The more they contained her, the more her need for autonomy became the core of her magic. When the truth of that suppression reached her, anger did not merely burn, it rearranged reality. In the fortress of Phala, where she had been kept under watch, her rage took form as a constellation of those dark orbs, dozens of them, humming with telekinetic power. Walls rose from their foundations as if gravity had forgotten its duty. Towers bent like reeds in a storm. Stone blocks tore free and hung weightless for a heartbeat before crashing down in a ruinous rain. Phala did not fall in a siege. It was lifted, twisted, and shattered from within by a single mortal whose emotions had finally slipped their leash. Rise fears what happens if he ever stops holding back. Syndra fears what happens if she ever lets anyone hold her back again. He is restraint-made flesh, walking the world with apocalypse in his backpack. She is the unbound storm, proving that immediate destructive capability can live in a single, furious breath. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits. And as we move on, you may notice how often its survival depends not on who is strongest, but on who can stay calm when provoked, before you drift into dreams of power without chains. So breathe slowly now, because if Syndra is a storm in a single chest, then Ionia itself is a sky made of countless breaths, and some of its most powerful mages are less lightning bolts and more weather patterns that never quite stop moving. Where she stands alone, there are others who are, by design, never just themselves. Karma is the clearest of these, the living soul of Ionia, a title that sounds poetic until you remember it is also quite literal. She is not one memory, but a chain of memories, life after life, each incarnation receiving the weight of the past like a lantern, passed from hand to hand in a very long night. Her magic is the echo of this procession. She channels the collective wisdom, the harmony, the compromises and regrets of her people, shaping spirit and battlefield alike with a calm that can bend armies without ever raising her voice. Power, here, is not an explosion. It is a chorus. And a chorus is dangerous, precisely because it does not depend on one throat. Zed, by contrast, is what happens when that chorus feels drowned out by cannon fire. His shadow magic is a weaponized refusal to be gentle, born from the trauma of Noxian invasion and the conviction that restraint is just another word for surrender. Where Karma listens for every whisper, he sharpens a single emotion, fear of loss, until it cuts through steel and spirit. The shadows that answer him are not demons, but they behave like a disciplined hunger, multiplying his presence, striking from angles that polite Ionia once pretended did not exist. Where once the Kinku preached balance, Zed's order preaches survival, and the balance can count its dead later. All of this is possible because Ionia's magic is not just in books or temples. It is woven into the land itself, a living network where forest, river, spirit, and villager share the same slow heartbeat. A joyful festival can thicken the air with protective blessings. A battlefield soaked in grief can call forth azakana that feed on unspoken guilt. A tranquil monastery can amplify a single monk's mantra into a barrier that turns aside blades. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits. So the land itself becomes an amplifier or a dampener, rewarding those who move with its rhythm and punishing those who tear at its seams. Sindra tears. She does not plug into this network. She rips herself free of it, and in doing so, she becomes vast and solitary. Karma's power is communal, braided from unity and long patience. Zed's is factional, an army of shadows born from shared anger and shared fear. Sindra's is isolation crystallized, a child's wounded cry scaled up until it can crack an island. Different stories, different emotions, and so the magic itself takes different shapes. What follows is not a tale of terror, but an emotional map of Runeterra, because Ionia is only one example of this strange ecology. In Noxus, ambition and survival feed war mages and the demon of secrets bound to Swain's ravens. In Demacia, suspicion and shame twist magic inward, birthing quiet catastrophes rather than loud ones. In Shurima, ancient pride and buried sorrow still resonate in beings like Zerath, while on Targon, awe and devotion carve stairways into the sky. Memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into. Yet whole regions try to live inside a single feeling. And when they do, their mages, their demons, and their disasters all begin to look the same. Before you drift into dreams of maps and fault lines, hold this thought. If emotions can shape a forest, what might an entire continent's fear or hope call into being? So breathe slowly now, because the answer is not only in Ionia's quiet groves, but in the way the whole world seems to feel. Runeterra is not a flat map. It is a mood ring laid over mountains and seas, where ice, sand, and stone remember different wounds and different joys, and those memories lean close to any mind that listens. In the Freljord, the air itself is an old argument. The frozen tundra holds grudges the way glaciers hold ancient bones, and every blizzard is a retelling of some forgotten betrayal. Where once the Watchers reached from the void, and Lysandra chose survival over faith, the snow has learned to be suspicious, to harden against mercy, to turn warmth into a rare and dangerous luxury. Mages born there find their power drawn toward endurance and control, toward magic that freezes not just flesh but possibility, because in such a climate, tenderness feels like a crack in the ice. Far to the south, Shurima's sands do something different. Dunes shift and swallow, then uncover ruins like half-remembered dreams. And the desert's emotion is not rage, but neglected pride. Once, the sun disk raised mortals into ascended gods, and Zirath's ambition shattered the ritual, turning ascension into an explosion of raw, unbound arcane fire. Where once loyalty to empire shaped noble guardians, now buried cities and sun-bleached bones, whisper of glory curdled into obsession. So the magic that thrives there is radiant, destructive, and hungry to be seen. Between these extremes, Ionia's tangled forests keep their living memory, But they are not alone. Noxus is a city of marching boots and whispered plots, where the emotional climate is disciplined aggression, wrath sharpened into strategy, cruelty wrapped in rhetoric about strength. It is no accident that Swain rises there, a man whose magic is a bargain with the demon of secrets and a lifetime of watching empires bleed. He is not merely powerful on his own. He is a focal point where centuries of conquest, paranoia, and ruthless ambition condense into one calculating gaze. Here is the pattern interrupt, sleepy summoner. We often speak of mages as solitary prodigies, but what follows is not a tale of terror, but of ecosystems. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits. Long wars, quiet oppressions, and even gentle spiritual practices create what you might call emotional climates. Where grief is never voiced, necromancers rise to speak for the unburied dead. Where rage is celebrated, battle mages blaze like living siege engines. Where ambition is rewarded above all, ascended beings, starforgers, and demons alike find willing hosts. Rise, wandering the post-rune wars world with world runes on his back, is not simply a cautious archivist. He is the condensation of an entire planet's fear of repeating its own mistakes. Memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into. Yet his life is a single, unending visit to catastrophe, carried in glowing sigils and weary footsteps. In him, you see how an age of reckless sorcery gives birth to a mage whose greatest spell is restraint. If you let your eyes close for a moment, before you drift into dreams, imagine Runeterra itself as a sleeping giant. Its dreams are the hopes of Demacia, the nightmares of Zorn, the restless visions of Targon. Its nightmares are void rifts, demon-haunted battlefields, and cities that fear their own mages. The strongest spellcasters are not those who stand apart from these tides, but those who become lucid dreamers inside them, shaping the storm instead of drowning. And in the next breath, we will step closer to those rare few who do not merely endure their region's emotions, but dare to rewrite them. So let us turn, quietly, to the empire that does not flee its storms, but drills soldiers to march inside them. Noxus is what happens when a nation decides that strength is sacred in every form, that a blade, a book, and a spell are all simply tools to carve a wider future. Where once mages might have been burned as omens or raised as distant idols, here they are folded into legions, war colleges, and shadowed courts, given rank and armor instead of chains. Breathe slowly now, because what follows is not a tale of terror, but of an empire that treats magic the way others treat steel. In Noxus, you do not hide your gift, you enlist it. Battle mages march beside infantry, war singers shatter morale with a word, and seers are drafted into strategy councils, their visions weighed against supply lines and siege engines. Power is not clean in such a place, yet it is strangely honest. If your spell can hold a wall, the wall is yours to hold. At the center of this philosophy stands Jericho Swain, a man who lost an arm, and in losing it, reached into something far older than Noxus itself. Bound to the demon of secrets, likely the one once called Room, Swain has turned whispers into weapons. Through his ravens, he peers from rooftop to rooftop, from battlefield mud to palace marble, harvesting every stray confession and half-spoken fear. In the chaos of war, he becomes something more than a general, siphoning life from those who fall around him, glimpsing branching futures in the flutter of black wings. steering an entire empire, like a single, ruthless spell. His magic is not a blazing comet. It is a ledger. Swain trades lives for outcomes, sacrifices pieces of the present to secure a colder, calculated tomorrow. Where once a commander might see only troops and banners, he sees patterns of emotion and intent, shadows where a demon might grow fat on secrets left to rot. Pragmatism is his faith. If 1,000 must be spent so that 1,000,000 may live, he signs the order with steady hand. Opposite him, yet intertwined, moves LeBlanc, the pale woman, whose true name may already be a forgotten memory. She does not command armies. She edits history. With illusions so precise they can fool touch and time, she appears as mentor, enemy, lover, or heir, then vanishes, leaving Noxus to argue over what was real. Where once there was one sorceress, there are now countless mirrored selves, a cabal of reflections wearing the same patient smile. Her power is not in a single devastating spell, but in the quiet rearrangement of belief. A whispered suggestion here, a false assassination there, an illusionary council that never truly met. Control, for her, is a tapestry woven from doubt. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits. And LeBlanc ensures that Noxus's story is never entirely in the hands of those who think they rule it. Together, Swain and LeBlanc show you a different kind of might. Not the brightest explosion, but the deepest incision into how a people think and remember. Their emotional axes are subtle and insidious. Swain's loyalty is to the idea of Noxus, not to any single life within it, while LeBlanc's devotion is to ambiguity itself, to a world where no truth stands unmasked for long. In their hands, magic becomes policy, rumor, and rumor's ghost. Memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into. Yet Noxus builds entire campaigns atop the remembered traumas and ambitions of its rivals, guided by a warlock general who hears every secret, and a sorceress who can rewrite which secrets ever existed. You might wonder, as you drift through their shadowed halls, what a nation like Demacia must look like through their eyes. A kingdom that tries to bury magic instead of drilling it, that walls off mages instead of commissioning them, does not escape the storm. It only drives it underground. And beneath Demacia's bright banners, in the silence where spells are forbidden to breathe, something has indeed been growing. Slowly, patiently, into one of the most quietly terrifying mages its history has ever known. And in the next hush, we will step into that hidden light. So let us turn, quietly, to Demacia. Breathe slowly now, because what follows is not a tale of terror, but of a kingdom that tried so hard to escape magic that it built its very walls out of the memory of catastrophe. In the distant past, when the rune wars tore the world open, Demacia's founders watched reality buckle under world runes and unchecked sorcery, saw fields turn to glass, and cities become shadows burned into stone. Where once families had homes, there were only craters. Where once oaths were made, only echoes remained. From that wound, they raised petricite forests and gleaming keeps, swearing that in this one corner of life, spells would never again unmake the morning. Petricite is more than a pale stone to them. It is a promise fossilized. It drinks in magic, dampens it, turns wild arcs of power into a dull whisper against its grain. Around it, Demacians built laws and rituals, nightly codes and solemn trials, all designed to keep sorcery outside the city gates, and more importantly, outside the human heart. Yet the world is not static, and neither are its spirits. And so the very air that filled those marble halls carried a quiet irony. You cannot forbid an emotion, and magic in Runeterra is so often just emotion given form. Luxana Crownguard is that contradiction, wrapped in silk and sunlight. In public, she is a perfect daughter of Demacia, all careful smiles and polite deference, her laughter bright but never too loud. In secret, her light blooms into something far larger than courtesy can contain, lancing outward in radiant beams that could scour a battlefield, unfolding into shields that could cradle an army in the space between one heartbeat and the next. She is a mage whose power bends around petricite, who can make even that hungry stone glow. Yet she has been taught to fear not only discovery, but herself. Before you drift into dreams, imagine what it means to live a life where every joyful impulse must be measured, every spark of wonder pressed down under duty. And in the same kingdom walks Silas, the boy who looked at chains and saw not a prison, but a conduit. Where Lux is forced to hide her own radiance, Silas learned to drink in the spells of others, to turn their secret, trembling gifts back upon the towers that denied them. With his petricite shackles, he does not simply cast, he reflects, steals, magnifies, making Demacia's repressed mages into a storm front rather than scattered raindrops. A single Luxian burst through his chains becomes a devastating arc of revolution. A hidden hedge witch's ward becomes a collapsing fortress wall. Repression is a lock. In Silas's hands, it is also a key. In such a place, every mage becomes more than a practitioner. They become a symbol, a pressure point where law and longing collide. The more Demacia insists that magic is an enemy, the more each hidden spell swells with the weight of secrecy, shame, and yearning, until the eventual eruption is not just arcane, but political, emotional, almost demonic in its hunger to rewrite the story of who is allowed to exist. Memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into. Yet Demacia tries to live forever in the shadow of the rune wars, and so its present is haunted by the very forces it refuses to name. Contrast this with Noxus, where a child with power is not hushed, but recruited, honed, thrown into the great experiment of empire. Where once Demacia builds walls, Noxus builds opportunities. Where once fear says never again, ambition whispers, what if? And so you begin to see that some of the most formidable mages in this world are born not from harmony, but from friction, from the endless grinding between who they are and what their homeland will allow them to be. In that grinding, light like Lux's becomes blinding, chains like Silas's become instruments, and the next mage we will meet does not merely push against their culture's limits, but tears them open on a scale that rivals the oldest horrors of the past. That tearing open does not always happen in ancient deserts or on forgotten battlefields. Sometimes it hums quietly in a workshop lamp, or in the crystal heart of a rifle held by hands that have never cast a spell. In Piltover and Zorn, the fracture between human limits and arcane possibility is engineered, patented, and sold by the crate. Breathe slowly now, and picture Piltover first. Clean air, bright bridges, and beneath the polished manners, a fervent belief that any problem can be solved if you can just persuade magic to behave like machinery. Hextech crystals, drawn from the deep places of the world, are carved and caged until they sing on command, turning raw arcane chaos into stable patterns that anyone can trigger. Where once a sorcerer needed years of discipline to conjure a barrier, now a constable snaps a gauntlet closed and a shimmering wall blooms in an instant. Where once only a gifted few could hurl lightning, a merchant's bodyguard simply pulls a trigger. This is a kind of mercy and a kind of danger. When power is rare, responsibility stays close to the one who wields it. When power is packaged, responsibility can dissolve into the crowd. A Hextech bridge collapses, and no single mage is blamed. Only a committee, a contract, a forgotten safety clause. Memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into. Yet Piltover builds its future on archives of blueprints and precedents, trusting that what worked yesterday will not betray them tomorrow. Across the cliffs, Zorn answers with its own alchemy of desperation. Chemtech, shimmer, and 100 unnamed reagents swirl together in vats lit by sickly light, where the line between science and sorcery blurs into a greenish haze. Here, the body itself becomes the spell. Lungs hardened against poison, muscles swollen beyond reason, eyes that glow with unstable brilliance. These are not elegant hexes, but living experiments, walking catastrophes whose very continued life is a question mark. Where Piltover refines, Zorn mutates. Where Piltover files patents, Zorn hides formulas in back-alley whispers. In both cities, the most powerful mages may never call themselves mages at all. Victor, with his relentless vision of a perfected humanity, and Jace, with his hammer that is equal parts weapon and theorem, are mages of method, not of blood. Their genius lies in understanding the grammar of magic well enough to teach it to metal and crystal, to scale a single insight until it can uplift a district or erase one. Progress is an emotion there, as sharp as envy and as blinding as pride, and it drives them toward devices that could stabilize nations or crack them open like glass. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits. So every hex core and chem pump becomes another invitation. Before you drift into dreams, consider this. When fear of weakness and hunger for a better life are distilled into engines, what kinds of demon lean close to listen? In the next stories, we will follow those answers into darker rooms, where beings born from terror and desire do not need tools at all. They only need you to feel. So let us step into one of those darker rooms together, not to be swallowed by it, but to see what waits in the corners when mages push too far. Breathe slowly now, because what follows is not a tale of terror, but a quiet examination of the things that frighten even the most powerful spellcasters in this world. Long before Noxus marched or Piltover dreamed of progress, there was a shape in the fields and battle-scarred valleys, a crooked scarecrow that did not guard crops so much as harvest screams. Fiddlesticks is older than nations, older than most written memory, a vessel of wood and rusted iron, animated by something far more ancient than straw, a demon of pure primordial fear that drifts toward war-torn or magically destabilized places, the way smoke drifts toward open windows. Where once armies clashed with steel and sorcery, and the air itself shook with world runes and ascended power, there are stories of a thing that arrived after the spells were cast, mimicking the last terrified word it heard before the field went still. You can imagine what that does to a mage who survives such a night. life continues. But every future incantation carries a new, cold calculation. If I rend the veil too violently, if I unleash too much chaos, what else might I be inviting? Fiddlesticks does not weave spells, does not bargain or boast. It is the shadow that falls when fear itself grows fat, a reminder that the aftermath of magic can be as dangerous as the spell. Nocturne, by contrast, is not so ancient, and that may make it feel uncomfortably close. Born from the accumulated failures of ritual circles and mind-piercing experiments, from mages who sought to weaponize terror and instead drowned in it, this demon of nightmares seeps into dreams and meditations, turning the private inner sanctum of the mind into a hunting ground, where once a sorcerer might close their eyes to refine a new ward or commune with a star. There is now the quiet question: if I reach inward through certain paths, who else might reach back? In this way, both Fiddlesticks and Nocturne function as a kind of unspoken law of nature, a check on magical hubris, written not in ink, but in rumor and trembling recollection. Mages who flirt with fear-based illusions, who stitch their power to panic, who dabble in forbidden rites that blur waking and dreaming, learn that they are not only crafting spells, they are hanging lanterns in the dark where these entities feed. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits. Where once a single reckless ritual birthed a nightmare, repetition can turn that nightmare into a pattern. Here is the pattern interrupt. In most rankings of great mages, these two would not appear at all. They do not study. They do not innovate. They do not stand in grand halls and lecture about the arcane. Yet every archmage who has stared too long into the abyss of their own fear carries them like a whisper at the back of the mind, shaping how far they dare to go. They are not mages. They are the shadows cast by mages' fears. So, before you drift into dreams, let yourself see Fiddlesticks and Nocturne less as monsters in the dark, and more as symbols of what happens when power and fear intertwine without wisdom. Memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into. And the same is true of fear. Pass through it, learn from it, but do not build your magic upon it, or you may find that something else has moved in first. In the next breath, we will return to those who do build their lives on power and ask what it cost them to stand in the light while such shadows wait just beyond the circle. So let us keep our place at the edge of that circle of light and breathe slowly now, because the next shadows that lean toward you are not made of fear, but of wanting and of hurt. Where once we spoke of demons that pounce upon terror in the night, we turn now to those that arrive with a smile, a caress, and exactly the thing you thought you could never have. Tam Kench is one such smile, stretched too wide, a demon of appetite and bargains who has worn 1,000 respectable faces across Runeterra's long memory. In riverside taverns and gilded Noxian halls alike, the story is always the same. He offers the desperate or the ambitious precisely what they ask for, and he is very careful to leave untouched everything they forgot to name. Where once a poor dockhand wished for coin enough to never starve again, there soon stood a rich merchant whose family no longer recognized him, whose past had been quietly eaten away. This is how desire becomes a current that pulls mages under. A battle mage on the front lines of a rune war echo, seeing their kingdom about to fall, might accept Tam's offer of one decisive spell something vast enough to rival the calamities Rise witnessed when world runes were misused. The price is only years. The demon purrs, just a handful from the end of your life. Power is a single moment. Repeat it too often, and your future vanishes. When the spell is cast and the enemy shattered, the mage's hair turns white in an instant, and every day after tastes a little thinner, as if something important has already been swallowed. Evelyn moves differently. She is not a bargainer, but a connoisseur, a demon of agony who feeds on the slow unfolding of suffering, who learned to refine pain into something that feels, to her victims, disturbingly close to love. Where once she was a formless wisp born from the world's first great wars, she has become a patient huntress, circling powerful figures and the tender places they hide. A lonely archmage in Piltover, isolated by brilliance and by the quiet fear of what their inventions might do, finds a stranger who listens, who understands, who makes the burden of genius feel lighter, until every confession becomes another thread for Evelyn to pull. What follows is not a tale of terror, but a reminder that the most dangerous battles for the strongest mages are often fought far from any battlefield. A mage's emotions are already heightened. The craving to be recognized, the ache of isolation, the terror of repeating the past's mistakes. Demons like Tom Kench and Evelyn do not need to overpower such souls. They only need to stand very close when a single decision is made, when a single night feels too empty to bear. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits. And so every new war, every new invention, every new lonely tower is fresh soil for them. Before you drift into dreams, hold this thought gently. Memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into. And desires are rivers to drink from, not oceans to drown in. As we move on to mages who reshape continents and call down stars, ask yourself whose whisper they truly follow. Because some of them know they dine with demons, and some have not yet looked down at the teeth beneath the table. So, breathe slowly now, because this is the place where we pause with our hands still on the door. And remember that what we have been walking through is a story, not a summoning circle. Demons, world runes, star-forging dragons, the watchers beneath the ice. These can sound like the opening lines of a nightmare, all shadow and teeth and endless falling. But what follows is not a tale of terror, but an invitation to look more closely at the feelings underneath the fangs. Fear gathers around fiddlesticks, because fear gathers around you too, in those quiet hours when the room is dark and the mind is loud. Desire clings to Tom Kench, because wanting more than is safe is a very human habit. When we speak of Aurelion Sol bending galaxies, or the Watchers waiting to rewrite the world, we are not trying to frighten you out of sleep. We are tracing the outer edge of emotions you already know from the inside. So, before you drift into dreams, let your attention come back to your own body for a moment. Notice the weight of your shoulders, the way the bed or chair holds you up without complaint, the simple, steady rhythm of breath moving in and out, the horrors of the rune wars. Rise watching continents burn under world runes, Zerath tearing himself free in a storm of living arcane fire. These belong to another world, a distant stage where emotions wear brighter costumes. They are reflections, not intrusions. The core of our journey is simple enough to say, and difficult enough to live. Powerful mages are what happens when ordinary emotions are amplified until they leave a mark on history. Pride becomes Zerath, no longer content with service, stretching toward the sun until his very flesh dissolves. Grief becomes Rise, wandering across ages with a backpack full of the same power that once unmade his home. Love, twisted by betrayal and control, becomes Syndra, whose childhood hurt grows until it can lift an Ionian fortress into the sky and crush it like a memory, where once we might have asked, in a brighter mood, who would win in a duel between star and storm. Here we ask something quieter. What does this power cost? And what does it say about the person who carries it? Power is a lantern. Hold it close and it lights your path. Clutch it tighter and it begins to burn. Power is a lantern. Raise it high enough and everyone can see the scars on your hands. As we move forward, I will not throw these mages at you as jump scares or spectacles, but as lives to sit beside for a while. We will visit Rise, Zerath, Syndra, Aurelion Sol, others whose names reshape maps, and we will treat each one as a soft-spoken character study, listening for the first small whisper that became a storm. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits, and neither are its mages. Together we will watch how a single emotion becomes a spell, becomes a legend, becomes a warning you can carry back into your own quiet present. Breathe slowly now, because if Syndra is a storm in the mind, then Lysandra is the long winter that never quite leaves your bones. A mage whose greatest spell is not one you see, but one you live inside without knowing. What follows is not a tale of terror, but a quiet walk along the edge of an old betrayal, where the snow itself is part of the lie. In the deep past, before Freljord was a word on any map, there were 3 sisters who reached for more than mortal life, and one of them listened when something vast in the void began to whisper back. Lysandra bargained with the Watchers, those reality-warping beings beneath the howling dark, and she became their herald, promising them a path into the world through her magic, through her people, through the open door of trust. Where once she walked as a priestess of the cold, she then strode as an emissary of unmaking. But even a herald can flinch. When she finally saw what their full awakening meant, when ice itself began to twist under their presence, she turned, not into a hero, but into something more complicated, a traitor to her gods so that the world might continue. She lured them deeper, folded the very seas and glaciers over their emerging forms, and entombed the Watchers beneath an everlasting winter, a prison so wide that you and I simply call it climate. Her magic is not gentle. With a thought, she can freeze an army mid-charge, each soldier locked in a final breath, or raise jagged ice to redraw a battlefield, a valley, a coastline. Yet her subtler art lies in dreams and memory. She steps into sleeping minds, edits the story they tell themselves, and when whole tribes wake, what they recall of the past is what she has curated. An inconvenient truth becomes a half-remembered myth. A rebellion becomes a blizzard that must have happened. Here, her emotional axis reveals itself, a terror of oblivion, of being swallowed by the very void she once served, braided with an overwhelming desire for control. If history itself can turn against you, why not rewrite history? So she scrubs away the Watcher's true nature, her own betrayal, the cost of that ancient pact, until even her worshippers kneel to a version of her she has sculpted from omission and fear. Memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into, but Lysandra hoards and rearranges them like a dragon with its gold. The everlasting winter is her greatest work, both shield and shackle. It bleeds the Freljord of warmth, of easy harvests, of simple lives. Yet it also thickens the bars of the Watcher's cage, a global scale spell that must be constantly fed with ice, with dreams, with the slow erosion of truth. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits, and neither are its glaciers. Under her guidance, the land itself shifts to keep the void asleep. So she becomes a quiet world shaper, a mage whose every lie is a kind of mercy and a crime at once. Runeterra survives because an entire region is sacrificed to endless winter, because one woman chose a cold, slow suffering over instant annihilation. Before you drift into dreams, hold that paradox gently. The villain who may have saved you, the savior who will never allow her people to remember what they truly paid. And as we turn to other mages who bend continents and constellations, keep an ear out for that softest question in the snow. What price would you accept for a future no one remembers choosing? Breathe slowly now, because that question in the snow does not echo in Lysandra's mind alone. It is answered, challenged and rewritten by other powers that call the Freljord home. Powers that remember a different kind of future, where she buries the past beneath ice and shadow. Others carve their answers into storm clouds and sunrise. Anivia is one such answer, a cryo-phoenix whose very life is a circle rather than a line, a spirit of rebirth who dies and returns again and again in a rhythm older than any mortal memory. Where her wings pass, winter hardens then softens, and the seasons seem to lean toward her, as if the world itself were breathing with her. Her magic is not simply frost and hail. It is the slow turning of the year, the blizzard that breaks a starving army, the thaw that restores a village's hope, the unseen hand that lifts the morale of those who believe that tomorrow can be kinder than today. What follows is not a tale of terror, but of a guardian who teaches that endings are rarely final, only folded into the next beginning. Opposite her, yet bound to the same land, strides Volibear, the storm made flesh, the roar inside the thunderhead that refuses to be tamed. His power is lightning that does not ask permission, earthquakes that do not respect walls, the raw, primal emotion of a world that existed before maps and laws. Where Anivia guides the cycle, Volibear tears at the wheel, hurling it down the mountainside, to see what new shape life might take without the weight of civilization. His magic is a rejection of restraint, a declaration that the wild does not apologize for its own strength. Between these vast spirits and the fragile mortals who huddle around their fires stand the shamans and seers of the Freljord, mages whose spellbooks are made of stories and scars rather than parchment. They listen to the whisper of auroras, red omens in cracked ice, and offer sacrifices not to command, but to converse. Their power is relational, a weaving of trust and fear, where once a tribe might call Anivia's blessing to survive a brutal winter, and where now another might invite Volibear's fury to shatter an enemy fortress. In their hands, magic is a conversation, not a solitary thesis. Set Lysandra beside them, and you feel the fracture. Her secretive, controlling magic seeks to still the river, while Anivia insists it must flow and freeze and flow again, and Volibear would rather flood the valley than see it dammed. The Freljord becomes not just a frozen battlefield, but an argument about what change should look like. Careful cycles, unchained upheaval, or a locked and forgotten eternity. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits. And then, a pattern interrupt. What happens when this dialogue between spirit and mortal does not take place in howling tundra, but in whispering bamboo, or atop graves that do not stay quiet? From here, we will drift toward Ionia and the Shadow Isles, where the boundary between life and death thins, and death itself becomes a school of sorcery, a teacher as patient and unsettling as any god or demon you have met tonight, before you drift into dreams. Breathe slowly now, because when we leave Ionia's living groves behind, we do not step into simple darkness, but into a place where death itself learned to speak, and then refused to stop. The Shadow Isles were once the Blessed Isles, a sanctuary of scholars and careful mages, until one spell, one act of love and desperation, pulled too hard on the veil and tore the whole fabric of a kingdom. Viego's grief was the catalyst. A king who could not accept the stillness of his queen's final breath reached for a forbidden resurrection, trusting in ancient relics and a circle of trembling magi who believed knowledge alone could shield them. Where once the Blessed Isles were a haven of quiet study, of measured incantations and gentle wards, the ruination erupted instead, a tidal wave of necromantic force that flash-burned stone, twisted forests, and turned every lingering memory of life into something half-remembered, half-rotted, and still terribly awake. What follows is not a tale of terror, but of consequence. That single failed spell did not simply kill. It rewrote the rules of magic in the region, saturating the land with the black mist, a kind of ambient, hungry field of power. Where it pools thickest, lesser sorceries unravel, light gutters, and even the most disciplined mage feels their will erode, while spirits and necromancers find their strength multiplied, their every whisper and gesture echoed by the Isle's own insatiable appetite. Within this unending midnight rides, Hecarim, once a general of mortal cavalry, now a spectral warlord whose charge is both spell and slaughter. His magic is not subtle. When he descends upon a battlefield, terror itself becomes a weapon, and every panicked heartbeat is a drum calling the dead to rise. Fallen soldiers do not rest. They are yoked into his ghostly vanguard, spectral hooves pounding through earth and memory alike, feeding the ruination's momentum and ensuring that each skirmish becomes another story of the world slipping further from the living. If Hecarim is the charge, Thresh is the pause that comes after the scream. Once a caretaker of arcane vaults, he has refined cruelty into a discipline, wielding chains and a lantern that is as much a spellbook as a prison. He captures souls not only to steal their power, but to savor their regret, turning every recalled emotion, every replayed mistake, into fuel. His sorcery is psychological. He tortures through memory, proving that pain repeated is pain renewed, and that memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into. The black mist binds them both. It is the sea in which these necromancers swim, a field where once mortal mages, wraiths, and even wandering demons of sorrow can grow vast on the overflow of death. The world is not static. and neither are its spirits. The ruination shows you how a single miscast resurrection can become a permanent storm, reshaping coastlines, ship routes, even how distant cultures tell stories about the end of life. And as the mist creeps toward other shores, you might wonder which mage, somewhere far away, is already listening to its call and considering an answer. So, breathe slowly now, because to understand that creeping mist, you and I have to walk backward into the memory of a king who was never meant to be a mage at all. Viego did not spend decades bending runes to his will, did not apprentice under an archmage or study the careful philosophies of Ionia. He was a young monarch, fragile in temperament, but surrounded by power. As king of Camavor, he could command relics dredged from forgotten vaults, could summon sorcerers who whispered of ancient Shuriman rites and Blessed Isles miracles, could reach for magic that wiser hands only approached with ritual, caution, and fear. Access is its own kind of spell. It tells you that if you want something badly enough, the world must eventually yield. When Isolde died, that quiet suggestion became a demand. The stories say her passing was sudden, senseless, a single moment that shattered Viego's sense of a just world. Where once there was a ruler, there was now a man who could not imagine a future without rewinding the past. And so he carried her body to the Blessed Isles, to that sanctuary of luminous waters and gentle priests, and insisted that death itself was negotiable. The ritual he forced into being was never truly his. It was a patchwork of borrowed incantations, relic-powered channels, and the sacred waters that had long guided souls to rest. What follows is not a tale of terror, but of one emotion pushed past its limit. When Isolde's form stirred, when her eyes opened not with love, but with agony and confusion, Viego's mind broke the rest of the way. He clutched at her, refused to release her back to the water, refused to accept that some doors, once closed, must stay that way. The spell did not simply fail. It tore. The waters boiled. Reality thinned. And the ruination poured out. A single moment of denial stretched into an endless roiling storm. In that instant, Viego's grief became architecture. The black mist is not just a cloud of necromantic energy, but a spell that never finished resolving. A wound in the world where his refusal to let go repeats, over and over, in every haunted tide. Memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into. The Piltover watchmaker inscribed that lesson inside his clocks and stepped gently forward. Viego engraved the opposite into the very coastline of Runeterra. Where once the Blessed Isles were a sanctuary, now the Shadow Isles stand as a monument to one man's obsession, a place where the past refuses to stay quiet, where every restless spirit is pulled into his unfinished story. You can hear the moral whispering beneath the screams. You do not need to be a master of the arcane to break the world. You only need access, unbearable pain, and the conviction that limits do not apply to you. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits. And when someone like Viego insists that time itself must obey his grief, reality bends until it snaps. Before you drift into dreams, hold that thought, because for every accidental king mage who tears a hole in the sky, there are others who look into such wounds and decide calmly to use them. And some of those are far more practiced than Viego ever was. Breathe slowly now, because when you lift your eyes from broken kings and weeping blades, you find another kind of mage waiting far above, written not in ink or blood, but in constellations. On Mount Targon, power does not simply awaken inside a mortal. It descends, like a patient star stepping into a borrowed body. These are the aspects, vast celestial ideas given shape, each one a living principle of the world: war, the sun, the moon, change, and more that we only glimpse in passing. They are not quite gods and not quite demons, but something in between, where concept and consciousness blur, where once there was only a human heartbeat, and now there is a chorus of distant voices. An aspect chooses a host, and in that choice, a simple life is rewritten into a story that spans past and present at once. Take Zoe, the aspect of Twilight, who wears her divinity like an oversized cloak she keeps tripping over. To meet her is to feel that disorienting mixture of childlike play and unfathomable age, as if a star decided to play hopscotch with gravity. Her portals are not just little doors. They are shortcuts through space that ignore the careful lines the world has drawn, skipping her from one battlefield edge to another, as though distance were only a shy suggestion. She can tug on time too, creating moments that feel like echoes, where a spell or a step repeats itself. A skipped stone on the river of memory. What follows is not a tale of terror, but a quiet recognition that if Zoe ever chose to be cruel, those same playful distortions could become cataclysm. A portal large enough, placed carelessly, is a wound in reality. A time skip wide enough, held too long, could shear cause from effect and leave only drifting fragments of what once was a day in someone's life. Yet she giggles. She wanders. She is distracted by stories and sweets. And so Runeterra survives on the gentle accident of her benign emotion. Pantheon, by contrast, reminds you that not all magic looks like shimmering sigils and spirals of light. As the aspect of war, his power descends into muscle and bone, into the arc of a spear, and the unyielding decision to stand when every shadow says, fall. Where once Atreus was only a Raka warrior, now his leap can tear through the sky itself, a burning omen that crashes into the heart of a battle and tilts courage, fear, and fate in a single impact. Yet even here, the question lingers. Who is the mage, the man or the star? Atreus once tried to refuse, to push back against the will that saw mortals as expendable pieces on an eternal game board. And in that struggle, you see the tension of all aspects. Agency is braided. The human remembers old pains and small joys. The celestial remembers ages of conflict, and together they cast a spell that is half choice, half inevitability. Memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into, but an aspect lives in every memory of its theme, and the host must learn to walk through that endless gallery without dissolving. In Zoe and Pantheon, you can trace a bridge between beings like Aurelian Sol, who forges stars as easily as others breathe, and the grounded mages who study runes in lonely towers. Where once power was only stolen or born, here it is shared, possessed, resisted, and negotiated, a spectrum of partnership that shows the world is not static, and neither are its spirits. Before you drift into dreams, keep that bridge in mind, because on the far side of it wait other mortals who try to seize such cosmic fire without an invitation. And their stories do not end so gently. So let us cross that bridge together. And when our feet touch sand again, it is Shurima that greets you, an ocean of dunes where the past is never truly buried, only rearranged by wind and time. Breathe slowly now, because here the ground itself remembers, and in one wandering girl, those memories learn to move. Talia is not a god, not a living sun, not a screaming storm of pure arcane like Zerath. She is a stone weaver, a shepherd's daughter, whose hands learned first to guide wool, and only later to guide the bones of the world. With a gesture, she can raise walls of rippling rock to shield a caravan from raiders, or unfurl a long undulating road of stone beneath her feet, and ride it like a wave across the open desert, outrunning sandstorms and soldiers alike. Where once the dunes were an enemy to be endured, in her presence they become a conversation partner, answering every quiet wish with shifting ridges and careful ledges. Her power is smaller than Zerath's in scale. Yes, but smaller does not mean safe. A single wall in the right canyon can divert a river and turn fields to dust. A misjudged tremor beneath a crowded market could send stalls, stories, and lives sliding into a sudden chasm. Talia can redraw battle lines in an instant, severing armies from their supply, sealing off oases, or folding the earth into jagged teeth that end a charge before steel ever rings. One girl, one emotion held a heartbeat too long, and an entire caravan may find itself either sheltered from the storm or swallowed by it. And then there is Renekton. Not a mage in the delicate scholarly sense, but an ascended warform, a crocodilian titan who bears Shurima's solar blessing, like a wound that never closes. Where Talia shapes stone with care, Renekton simply breaks it. Where she listens for the earth's whisper, he drowns it in roars of fury. His is the afterimage of Ascension's promise turned sour. Strength without serenity, divinity without direction. A reminder that when power is forced through fragile mortal minds, it can calcify into rage instead of wisdom. What follows is not a tale of terror, but of a land saturated with old magic, where such opposites can stand side by side. The ruins of the sun disk still bleed latent solar light into the bedrock. Half-buried temples hum with forgotten rites, and relics sleep beneath the sand like seeds. In such soil, unusual gifts sprout easily. Stone that bends for a shepherd, sand that sings for an urchin, echoes of ascended glory that cling to those who never asked for them. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits. Shurima proves this with every unearthed shard and every child who feels the ground answer back. Talia's story, at least for now, is a gentler answer to that call. She walks away from thrones and banners, from emperors reborn, and weapons that would gladly claim her, choosing instead to understand her weaving before it hardens into a cage. Power is a home. Live in it too soon, and you forget the sky outside. Power is a home. Visit it with care, and it becomes a shelter, not a prison. She learns. She listens. She leaves when the shadow of command grows too long. Memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into. And she treats her own magic the same way. Something to honor, to master, but never to let define the whole of her life. Before you drift into dreams, hold that contrast in your mind. The raging ascended who cannot escape what was done to him, and the young stone weaver who refuses to be only what she could destroy. Because beyond Shurima's dunes, other mages will make different choices when the weight of history presses against their hearts, and some will embrace storms far darker than sand or stone. Breathe slowly now, because where Shurima's storms roar and ascended rage against the chains of the past, another kind of power seeps quietly through pipes and alleys, rewriting the future, one drop at a time. If Zerath is a sun gone mad, then in Zorn you find mages who prefer the slow, patient eclipse. In a forgotten corner of that undercity, there is a man who treats life like an equation and pain like a reagent. Singed is not a sorcerer in the traditional storybook sense, yet his chem alchemy can melt an army to slurry, turn a river into a creeping green demon of poison, or twist a child's body into something that no longer remembers how to be human. His lab is not a tower crowned with runes. It is a battlefield in miniature, where each vial is a siege engine, each whispering flask a possible extinction event, and where once a rat or a plant was a simple creature, it may awaken as a nightmare that does not know it was engineered. What follows is not a tale of terror, but of scale. Singed rarely hurls a single grand spell. Instead, he changes the rules of survival, so that air, water, and soil themselves become hostile incantations. A gas cloud drifts through a trench, and hours later, an entire regiment simply does not rise. A new plague strain slips into Zuln's canals, and by the time anyone understands, the ecosystem has already shifted around it. Power is a single explosion. Repeat it, and people adapt. But change the environment, and the environment changes them. Across the bridge of class and steel, Victor stands beneath colder, cleaner light. Where Singed dissects, Victor dreams. His doctrine of glorious evolution is a hymn to hextech and augmentation, to the idea that human frailty is a temporary inconvenience rather than a defining trait. Limbs of metal, minds threaded with crystal circuits, hearts beating in measured, perfect rhythm. For Victor, these are not horrors, but the next verse in the song of life. Yet you can hear the tension in that hymn, can you not, before you drift into dreams? Uplift the species too far, and the thing called human becomes a fading memory. Victor's magic is not a fireball. It is infrastructure. He builds networks of augmented workers, autonomous constructs, devices that hum in the background of ordinary days, until one morning, the city wakes and realizes the ratio of flesh to steel has quietly inverted. Where once a worker coughed in Zuln smog, now a gleaming chassis moves tireless through the night, and the old emotions of exhaustion, fear, and fragile hope have fewer places to live. Singed moves along an axis of cold curiosity. A man who long ago decided that memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into. And so he steps past guilt, as though it were just another spilled beaker. Victor, by contrast, is all sharpened idealism and sorrowful frustration, haunted by the shadow of what humans could be if they would only let go of their limitations. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits. In Zorn, that truth is etched into bone and brass alike. These are philosopher mages of a different order, less likely to tear the sky in a single night, more likely to leave you in a world that has, very gently, stopped recognizing you. And somewhere beyond Zorn's choking fog, another mage watches such transformations with hungry interest, wondering how a single soul might be refined even further, until nothing human is left at all. Breathe slowly now, because where Zorn's fumes thin and Piltover's towers fade into mist, the world tilts just a little, and something small, soft-furred and impossible, steps through. What follows is not a tale of terror, but of beings who are themselves a kind of spell, walking contradictions that bend magic simply by existing. Yordles, the children of Barndle City, do not quite belong to the same solid, stubborn reality you and I inhabit. They stand half in the material, half in a hidden network of paths and doorways, where distance is a suggestion and time is more of a mood. Where once you might measure a mage by the size of their staff or the thickness of their grimoire, here you measure them by how the air changes when they laugh, how a memory lingers in the room long after they leave. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits, and Yordles are a quiet proof of that. Consider Vagar, for instance, that tiny silhouette framed against a too large hat, announcing himself as the greatest evil to ever stalk the night. You might smile at the theatrics, at the high-pitched declarations of doom, yet the shadows around him do not smile. They listen. When he calls down a meteor, the stone is very real. The impact, a brutal punctuation in the earth. His cages of crackling energy do not care whether you find him comical, and the bolt of pure arcane force that ends a life does not pause to ask if the caster is tall enough to be taken seriously. Power is power. Repeat it often enough, and the story it tells about you hardens into truth. Then there is Heimerdinger, whose magic is so neatly dressed in gears and brass that Piltover can pretend it is not magic at all. His turrets, his rockets, his humming hextech engines blur the line where invention ends and sorcery begins. And for centuries, his restless curiosity has nudged the city of progress toward futures it was not yet ready to understand. Where once a human lifetime could encompass the rise and fall of a single technology, Heimerdinger's long, unhurried life lets him refine, revise, and revisit until an idle experiment from his past becomes the foundation of someone else's present. This is the quiet danger and the quiet wonder of Yordle mages. Their projects are not bound to one brief span of years, but to eras. A warding device left in a forgotten workshop becomes a myth 2 generations later. A whimsical portal experiment reshapes a trade route, then a kingdom's borders, then the emotions of a people who no longer remember why their festivals follow the pattern they do. Memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into. Yet Yordles stroll through their own centuries of recollection as easily as you cross a room, and the world rearranges itself around the paths they take. So, before you drift into dreams, hold this thought close. Not every powerful mage arrives with tragedy in their wake or terror in their eyes. Some of the most world-shaping spellcasters are small, distracted, half listening to the present as they chase a new idea through the corridors of their very long lives, leaving trails of altered gravity and humming crystal in their footsteps. Where once we looked only to towering archmages and cataclysmic demons to explain how history bends, we must also look down to Barndle City and beyond, and ask what happens when such reality-tilted beings finally meet powers older and hungrier than themselves. So we stand here for a moment, between Yordle mischief and the older hungers beneath the ice. And I want you to breathe slowly now, because what follows is not a tale of terror, but a quiet taking stock of the patterns that have been walking beside us all along. When you replay each story in your memory, from Starforgers to Stoneweavers, a single thread begins to glow under the surface. Again and again, obsession bends the world toward catastrophe, while restraint, fragile and human, keeps it from breaking. Zerath's hunger for recognition turns a sun disk into a weapon, and a man into a living cataclysm. Syndra's refusal to be diminished lets her emotions swell until it tears an Ionian temple from its roots. The rune wars show us what happens when world runes are treated as trophies instead of as caged storms. Where once a single decision seemed private, the blast radius stretches across continents. And yet, the mages who frighten us least are not always the ones with the smallest spells, but the ones who are constantly choosing not to cast. Rise, walking the world with enough power in his pack to unmake it, defined not by the runes he wields, but the apocalypses he refuses to repeat. Karma, sitting at the heart of Ionia's pain, able to dominate minds and rewrite futures, choosing instead to argue, to persuade, to wait. Talia, hearing Shurima's deserts answer her every whim, and turning away from the easy path of becoming another desert storm in human shape. Power is one thing. The boundaries you draw around it are another. Power is a spell. Repeat it without question, and it becomes a prison. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the echoes of mages we will never meet. A nameless frost guard who whispered the wrong vow to a watcher in the dark. A Damatian child whose first uncontrolled light spell carved a scar into a family home, then taught a kingdom to fear magic. A pilgrim in Targon who looked up, felt the stars answer, and quietly said. Their stories do not fill tomes, but their choices still live in ruined staircases, in oddly twisted trees, in the way a river bends where no river should. Before you drift into dreams, consider how this feels in your own life. Your words are not world runes. Your habits do not crack continents. Yet each small spell you cast in the present reshapes the emotional world of someone else's tomorrow. A kindness repeated becomes a sanctuary. A cruelty repeated becomes a demon that waits in another person's shadow. In a moment, we will gather all of these threads and attempt something dangerous. A loose hierarchy of power, from those who nudge a village's fate to those who could, with one unguarded impulse, rewrite the sky. It will not be definitive. Memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into. And the world is not static, and neither are its spirits. Instead, think of it as a final, meditative framework, a way to weigh not only how much magic a mage can wield, but how much of themselves they are willing to spend to wield it. So, breathe slowly now, because what follows is not a tale of terror, but a gentle attempt to stack storms and sunsets on the same shelf, to place a cosmic dragon beside a frightened prodigy, and call it a hierarchy with a straight face. We are not weighing lives. We are only weighing stories. At the highest tier, far above any battlefield you or I could walk, drift the cosmic creators and erasers, beings for whom Runeterra is a single line in a much longer poem. Aurelion's soul, who forges stars as easily as you or I exhale. And the Watchers, frozen beneath the Freljord, yet still capable, in half-remembered motion, of unmaking the rules that let matter and memory hold together. Their magic is not a spell, but a setting. They do not simply bend the world. They decide what world means. Beneath them, though still towering, stand those tied to the world runes, and ascended power. Mages who can reach for that same rulebook and scribble in the margins. Rise, carrying in his scroll and satchel the very runes that once nearly ended all life, is terrifying, not because he acts, but because he chooses not to. Zerath, a living conflagration of Shuriman ascension, reshaped deserts and dynasties when he shattered his mortal shell. Lysandra belongs here as well, not only for her own sorcery, but for the era she tried to rewrite by chaining the Watchers in ice and burying that sin beneath 1,000 years of snow and silence. Then we come down to the regional archmages, the ones whose shadows stretch across nations rather than continents. Swain, who turns a demon of secrets into a constant whispering council. Karma, whose cycle of reincarnated wisdom lets Ionia remember itself when war and sorrow try to make it forget. Lysandra again, as queen and myth, shaping Freljordian belief as much as its blizzards. Powerful demons themselves sit here at the edge of the frame, not quite mages, yet wielding emotion as if it were spellcraft, rewriting the present by feeding on the past. Below them, in raw magnitude, if not in narrative weight, are the prodigies. Syndra, whose tantrum nearly erased an island. Lux, radiant and terrified of what her own light might reveal. Talia, weaving earth with a kindness that could still, if panicked, bury a city. A single unstable child in the wrong marketplace can be more immediately dangerous than a distracted starforger who has forgotten this tiny world exists. Around all of this, like footnotes that refuse to stay small, linger the edge cases. Aspects who share their divinity with mortal hosts. Void entities whose very presence unravels magic. And Piltover's technomancers, whose inventions hum so loudly they almost count as spells. The lines blur. The tears soften. Memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into. And any ranking that feels too solid is already a little untrue. So before you drift into dreams, hold this hierarchy lightly, as a lens rather than a scoreboard, and ask yourself, very quietly, if you had to choose, would you reach for the distant power that shapes stars, or the intimate power that breaks a single heart? In the next breath, we will walk that question to its unsettling end. So, in this next breath, let us stay with that unsettling question a little longer, because in Runeterra, the answer is almost never simple strength, but the slow, quiet tally of what each mage has given up to stand where they stand. Breathe slowly now, and listen to the way power reshapes not just the world, but the person who dares to hold it. Corruption in these stories is rarely a sudden fall. It is a long erosion. Zerath did not wake one morning as living arcane fire. He stepped, willingly, into the sun disk and let his body dissolve into unstable energy until there was no clear line between his will and the storm that howls inside him. Viego did not plan to become a ruinous echo. His mind was simply consumed by a single grief, repeated so often that it became a demon of obsession wearing a king's reflection. Lysandra's change is colder still. Her humanity, buried under centuries of lies told to her own people, until even her memories feel like tools rather than treasures. When you stare only at one desire, one sorrow, one victory, perfection is a single note. Repeat it too often, and the melody dulls. Where there is corruption, there is usually isolation. Rise walks the land alone, carrying world runes that once nearly unmade creation. and every village he passes is another place he cannot stay, another friend he cannot trust with the truth. Syndra chooses exile because the moment others tried to bind her, her power surged in terror and rage, and now she floats above the seas, a storm that fears its own thunder. Aurelion Sol's solitude is vaster still, a cosmic forger of stars, chained by lesser beings, drifting through a universe that feels beneath him, and yet painfully empty. Where once companionship was possible, the weight of magic becomes a wall, and the shadow it casts is very long. Then there is the burden of simply knowing too much. Swain's captured demon of secrets whispers futures and betrayals into his mind, until every conversation is layered with invisible threads he cannot ignore. Karma carries generations of Ionian memory inside one fragile present body, feeling every choice echo through lives already lived. Rise, more than most, knows exactly what a single mistake with a rune could do, because he has walked battlefields turned to glass and heard the last prayers of nations. Knowledge is guidance. Repeat it without rest, and it becomes a cage. And yet, what follows is not a tale of terror, but a reminder that the world is not static, and neither are its spirits, nor the people who touch them. There are mages who reach for healthier paths. Talia, who seeks teachers and gently folds her stone weaving around, not through the lives of others. Nameless shamans and spirit talkers who see themselves as caretakers rather than rulers of magic, speaking with river and wind as equals. Memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into, and some few remember this. So, before you drift into dreams again, hold this thought. In Runeterra, as in your own life, the true question is not how strong you might become, but what you will sacrifice along the way, and who will be left when the power finally answers. In the next part of our story, we will leave the lonely heights of these archmages and walk among those who live beneath them to see how the echoes of such choices shape ordinary days and quiet nights. So let us pause among those ordinary days and quiet nights and turn, just for a moment, to you. Breathe slowly now. Before you drift into dreams, I want you to imagine a different awakening, one that begins not in your familiar room, but beneath an unfamiliar sky. You open your eyes in Runeterra. The air tastes of distant storms and old spells. In your hands rests a stone the size of your heart, its surface carved with shifting sigils that you somehow understand and do not understand at all. It is warm, humming softly, and with each beat of your pulse, the world rune answers. A faint echo of power that seems to rise not only from the artifact, but from the very bones of the world. When you think of silence, the wind stills. When you remember a lost kindness, the air brightens. A stray, fearful emotion, and a shadow at the edge of the valley stretches too far. This is not a trinket. It is the same kind of force that once shattered continents in the rune wars, the same kind of burden Rise carries across deserts and ruined cities. Each world rune, a sealed catastrophe and a promise. The temptations arrive quickly, as temptations always do. With a gesture, you could still the clash of two Noxian and Demacian armies below, turning steel to harmless dust. With a whispered memory of what once stood, you might restore a ruined Shuraman town, reweaving homes, wells and marketplaces as if the past had never burned. A single focused wish, and someone you lost might stand before you again, breathing, present, as though death were only an inconvenient story. Or you could carve out a sanctuary, a circle of land where no demon, no war, no whisper of harm could ever cross the boundary. A place where nothing could hurt you, or those you choose, ever again. But the world is not static, and neither are its spirits. Power that bends reality rarely stops where you intend. End a war in an instant, and perhaps the sudden peace starves nations that prepared for conflict, or births new demons of resentment and humiliation. Restore a city, and you might overwrite lives that grew in its absence. Call someone back, and you may find, as Viego did, that what returns is not what left, that grief repeated is grief sharpened. And then there are the watchers in the dark, demons drawn to the intensity of your emotions, void things pricking up senses at the warp in reality, ancient mages and hidden cabals feeling the tremor and turning their gaze toward you. You are no longer a quiet traveler. You are a beacon. So what would you do? Use it once, then hide it where even you cannot find it. Study it, as Rise does, turning your life into a long, lonely pilgrimage of containment. Seek a way to unmake it, knowing that to destroy such a rune might wound the world as deeply as to wield it. Or would you, like Viego, keep telling yourself that one more careful spell will finally fix everything, that the next change will be the last? Perhaps now, Rise feels less like a distant archmage, and more like someone pacing the same narrow corridor of choices you walk in your own life, where memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into. And yet, you keep reaching back. Perhaps Lyssandra's cold bargains, her choice to freeze the watchers, and her own truth beneath the Freljord feel less monstrous when you imagine a single mistake devouring all you love. Power is a mirror. Stare into it long enough, and it shows you not only what you could become, but what you already are. Hold that image of yourself, small but luminous, against a vast, dangerous world, a world rune in your hands, and 1,000 futures branching outward. In the next part of our story, we will set the rune gently aside and return to those who must live in the wake of such choices, to see how their songs, their fears, and their quiet acts of courage shape the magic that never makes it into legend. So, breathe slowly now, and let that image of the world rune in your hands dissolve, as if it were only one bright thread in a much larger tapestry you have barely begun to see. For every world-shaping decision that makes it into a song, there are 100 others that live only as a shadow at the edge of a half-remembered story. Somewhere in the deep past, before names like Rise or Zerath were ever spoken, there were rune scholars whose titles have been worn away by time, yet whose work still holds the world together. An unnamed circle of archmages first traced the patterns that would become world runes, not as weapons, but as careful notations in the margins of reality. And then others, equally forgotten, wove the wards that still sleep beneath coastal cliffs and mountain passes, turning aside storms and invasions so quietly that no one thinks to thank them. Power does not always announce itself. Sometimes it is a long, patient silence. If you walk the docks of Bilgewater in your memory, just before you drift into dreams, you might notice the way certain fogs never quite roll in, the way some routes remain mysteriously safe, while others seem cursed. Sailors blame demons or luck, yet hidden among them are tide callers and stormbinders, whose spells nudge trade and tragedy alike, whose emotions ripple out as currents that redraw maps. In Camivor's lingering legends, there are whispers of a death mage who refused to follow the path that led to ruin, who turned their art instead toward holding the restless quiet, so that only one king's madness would echo into undeath instead of an entire continent. And then there is Ixtal, where the very ground remembers how to obey a mage's voice. The people who raised Kiana did not stumble upon elemental magic. They refined it until stone, air, fire, and water became extensions of thought and breath. Their geomancers adjust rivers by a hand's width to prevent famine a century from now. Their elementalists tune storms so that a single village festival will not be washed away, and none of these acts are recorded as miracles. Where once a single archmage might have been praised as a prodigy, an entire culture now moves at that level, which means there are surely archmages among them whose names you will never hear. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits, and so it follows that for every named champion whose life you can recite, there are countless unseen mages whose choices bent borders, softened wars, or birthed the myths that later heroes merely reenact. Magic is not only in the cataclysms, it is in the quiet corrections, the forgotten protections, the wards renewed by hands that never sign treaties. Memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into. And the lore you know today is only the visible layer of a much deeper, shifting archive. What follows is not a tale of terror, but an invitation to uncertainty, because any one of these background figures could step forward in some future chronicle, a patch note, or a short story away from being recognized as one of the most powerful mages Runeterra has ever known. Rankings tremble when new memories surface. And as we move on, I want you to keep one simple, unsettling thought close. If this many giants are still hidden in the margins, who might be waiting, just off the page, to rewrite everything you think you understand about power? That thought of hidden giants is unsettling. Yes, but let it fade to the edges for a moment. Breathe slowly now, because for a little while, I want to leave the edge of the world and come back to a much smaller place. Not Shurima's blasted deserts or the void-scarred Freljord. Just this room, the one you are in right now, in the present, while all those distant cataclysms remain safely sealed inside story and memory. If you listen, you may notice the soft whir of a fan tracing lazy circles through the air, or the faint rush of distant traffic, like an ocean heard from far inland, or perhaps only the quiet creak of your chair as you shift your weight and remember that you, unlike Aurelion's soul, do not have to hold any stars in place tonight. Where once we spoke of world runals that could unmake continents, here there is only a cup of tea or water cooling slowly beside you, a thin ribbon of warmth surrendering itself to the room. Where once we watched Zerath tear himself free inside the sun disk, here there might be a pet breathing nearby, chest rising and falling in a rhythm older than any spell, a small living anchor against the grand abstractions of power. Where once we traced the shadows of the watchers beneath the ice, here there is only the glow of your monitor, a quiet, artificial star casting gentle light across your hands. What follows is not a tale of terror, but a reminder of scale. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits. Yet most of life unfolds in these tiny, almost unremarkable moments. The way your blanket folds, the way a shadow shifts on the wall when a car passes outside, the way your own breath sounds when you actually pause to hear it. Power can be a star-forging dragon. Power can also be the choice to let your shoulders drop, to release some old tension you did not realize you were still carrying from the past into this quiet present. If your attention has drifted in and out, that is not a failure. It is part of the design. This is not a battlefield briefing. This is a companion for rest and reflection, something you are allowed to half forget and then rediscover, like a book left open on a nightstand. In a way, listening itself is a kind of magic. No runes, no incantations, only words and images slipping past your defenses to gently rearrange the landscape inside you. A story is a spell you consent to. Cast it once, and it lingers as a memory. Repeat it, and it begins to shape who you are. But memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into. So before you drift into dreams, I will guide us toward a gentle landing. We have only 2 more soft steps ahead, a quiet gathering of all these mages and moments into one last simple picture, and then an invitation for you to lay your own rankings beside mine, to whisper which powers moved you and why, before the lights of this little world finally go out for the night. So, let us gather everyone back into the circle for a moment, sleepy summoner, and hold the whole story in our hands at once. Breathe slowly now, because what follows is not a tale of terror, but a gentle inventory of wonders, from the star forger to the street mage, from the first spark of creation to the smallest stubborn light in the dark. At the very top, we walked among beings who treat our world as a passing thought. Aurelion's soul, the dragon who forges stars as you might idly trace shapes in the air, and the Watchers, those buried minds beneath the Freljord, whose mere awakening could rewrite existence. Where they move, continents are accidents, and history is a side effect. And you felt, I hope, how tiny even the grandest empire becomes in that shadow. Then we stepped down, not to safety, but to familiarity. Rise with his satchel of world runes, carrying enough ruin on his back to end the world a second time, yet choosing restraint as his only real spell. Xerath, a man who shattered himself inside the sun disk and became a storm that will not stop. And Lysandra, who bargained with the Watchers and froze her own land in a half-finished nightmare. Here, magic was not just force, but the weight of choices that echo from the past into the present. Below them, we trace the archmages who define regions rather than realities. Swain, turning a demon of secrets into a quiet, constant whisper that guides an empire. Karma, bearing the layered memory of Ionia, every life before her folded into a single calm voice. The aspects of Targon, where mortals wear constellations like cloaks. And yes, Lysandra again, as queen and lyre, not just a servant of the void. Where once power meant conquest, here it meant responsibility, or at least the pretense of it. And then, closest to the ground, the prodigies and street mages whose storms are still learning their own shape. Syndra, whose power exploded the moment others tried to cage it. Lux, hiding sunlight in a kingdom that fears its own reflection. Talia, weaving stone, while she tries to weave a life that will not hurt those she loves. Their spells feel like the emotions of youth made visible. every doubt and hope thrown into the sky. Along the way, we kept small parables in our pockets. The Piltover watchmaker, who told a demon of obsession, no, and discovered that memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into. Viego, who could not let go, and drowned a continent in grief made physical. Rise, who has the power to unmake the world and instead walks quietly, gathering and hiding it. Syndra, who showed us that when you push a feeling down hard enough, it does not vanish. It detonates. If some names blurred at the edges for you, that is all right. Before you drift into dreams, remember that what matters is the feeling of a world where every spell is also an emotion, every mage a moving story. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits. And in our last step together, I will ask you to place yourself somewhere on this arc of power, and to wonder, very softly, what kind of magic your own choices might leave behind. So, breathe slowly now, because this is the part where the story turns its lantern toward you, sleepy summoner, and asks a quieter question. We have walked through wars and wonders, watched reality bend like light through glass, and traced the outlines of mages whose names have become almost like constellations in the night sky. Now, I would like you to choose one. If you had to lean toward a single source of power in this world, whose would call to you in the dark? Perhaps you feel the pull of Rise, with his disciplined orbit around the world runes. A lone figure crossing deserts and ruins, bearing memories of the rune wars, like heavy stones in his pack. His magic is not a spectacle, but a burden, where each spell is weighed against the possibility of catastrophe, where knowledge is both shield and chain. Or maybe Syndra's unbound emotion stirs something in you, that storm of orbs circling like angry moons, born from a life of being contained, silenced, diminished. Her power is the refusal to be small ever again, where once she was a frightened child, and where now she is a tidal wave of self, beautiful and terrible at the same time. What follows is not a tale of terror, but a meditation on what happens when a heart that has been pressed down for too long finally expands. You might find comfort in Swain's strategic insight, the whispers of a bound demon of secrets curling through his thoughts. Every shadow in Noxus, another piece on his invisible board. His magic is not about spectacle. It is about seeing further than anyone else, about turning corruption into clarity, about accepting that every victory leaves a stain. Or you may hear the soft, steady rhythm of Talia's connection to the land, weaving Shuriman stone like fabric. Her power a kind of communal promise that the earth remembers its people and can be mended where it was once broken. And then, far above, there is Aurelian Sol, for whom stars are toys and galaxies are idle sketches, a cosmic artisan forced into servitude, his pride as vast as the void between suns. To touch that scale of magic is to risk losing all sense of the small, tender details of life. Each of these paths carries a price. Rise's loneliness, Syndra's isolation and rage, Swain's constant temptation, Talia's responsibility to those who walk her roads, Aurelian's humiliation as a weapon in others' hands. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits. Power is never only a gift, it is also a question. Do you imagine yourself as a quiet steward, guarding dangerous runes in silence, or as an explosive voice, reshaping the present so no one can ignore your emotion again? Do you lean toward communal guidance, like a shaper of stone making safe passage for others? or toward experimental transformation, where insight and ambition twist together in the dark. Your answer is not just about Runeterra. It is a small mirror held up to how you relate to power in your own life, whether you hoard it like secrets, share it like a story around a fire, fear it and step away, or seek to understand it even when it frightens you. Before you drift into dreams, let that thought sit beside you for a moment. Memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into, but this one is worth returning to. And when you speak your choice aloud, or share it with another wandering soul, you turn solitary reflection into a shared spell, a circle of interpretation, where every answer adds a new line to the tale. In our final step, I will ask you not only which mage you chose, but what you are willing to offer in return. And there, the real negotiation begins. So let us widen that circle now, you and I, and invite a few more voices to the table of candlelight and ink. Breathe slowly now, because what follows is not a tale of terror, but an invitation to weave your own quiet spell into this story of power, consequence, and the mages who stand between the world and the void. In the comments below, I would like you to lay out your own top 5 most powerful mages in Runeterra, not as a hurried list carved in stone, but as a soft sequence of names with a sentence or two of why they linger in your memory. Perhaps you place Rise at the pinnacle, not only because he bears world runes that once nearly unmade creation, but because his life has become a pilgrimage of restraint, a man walking with apocalypse on his back. Perhaps you choose Syndra, whose raw emotion shattered the careful prisons meant to contain her, a reminder that suppressed potential does not vanish. It simply waits for a crack. You might feel drawn to Xerath, that living cataclysm who burst from Shurima's sun disk and turned devotion into incandescent ruin, or to Aurelian Sol, whose magic does not stop at oceans or continents, but reaches out to stir the very stars. Or maybe your heart chooses someone quieter, a regional archmage whose spells never broke the sky, but did change a single village, a single life. Each choice is a small confession about what kind of power you fear, admire, or secretly wish you could touch. As you write, know that I will be there, reading through your words like an archivist of runes, turning each comment over as if it were a carved stone tablet from some forgotten age. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits. And in a future telling, I may hold your collective rankings up against the colder, law-bound hierarchies, comparing what the stories insist is strongest with what your own emotions have crowned as most unforgettable. I invite you too to step gently into one another's shadows. If you see a list that clashes with your own, treat it as a different school of magic rather than an opposing army. Ask why Xerath stands above Aurelian Sol for them, or why a demon-touched sorcerer rivals an ascended god. Curiosity is a shield. Contempt is only another summoning circle for needless conflict. For those whose eyes grow heavy, there may be a pinned pole waiting, a simpler sigil to trace. Which source of power feels strongest to you in this vast, tangled world? World runes, ascension, demonic pact, or the cool precision of Hextech? A single click, a quiet choice before you drift into dreams. When you speak, when you type, you're casting a very small spell. You take wandering thought, half-faded memory, passing emotion, and you fix it in the present where another wandering soul might find it. In that way, your ranking, your reply, even your disagreement, helps keep these mages alive in the shared mythos of Runeterra. Memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into. But tonight, by placing your own among them, you help the story continue to breathe. So let yourself rest for a moment inside that thought, as if you had just set down a heavy, well-traveled book and can still feel its weight in your hands, even after the cover has closed. This journey through Runeterra's greatest mages has been long, layered with name and date and spell and consequence. And it is entirely all right if your attention wandered, if you drifted away for a few minutes, or rewound a fragment of a story that brushed against some quiet corner of your own life. You might have folded laundry while Aurelian Sol forged stars above your head, or scrolled through something else, while Rise walked alone with his world runes. A moving catastrophe he prays never to unleash. You may have half listened as Syndra's anger turned into orbiting spheres of power, or as Xerath shattered his mortal shell beneath the sun disk. And that is fine, because stories do not demand perfect focus to leave a gentle imprint. Sometimes a single image, a single whisper of emotion is enough. Breathe slowly now, and notice how you feel compared to when you first press play. Perhaps you feel a little heavier with stories, the way the air feels thicker just before rain. Or perhaps there is a slight, almost imperceptible awareness of how power and feeling, past and present, are always entwined, whether in a god dragon sculpting constellations or in a quiet mage trying not to become a demon to themselves. Let your attention drift outward, away from the spellwork and back toward your own small circle of light, the texture beneath your fingers, the familiar give of your pillow or chair, the way your blanket pulls around you like a soft, mundane ward against the chill. Notice the temperature of the room, whether the air rests cool on your skin or warm and still, and listen for the sounds that live just beyond your headphones. A distant car, a humming appliance, a muted voice in another room, the ordinary world continuing on while these shadows and legends move only in memory. What follows is not a tale of terror, but a slow unspooling. You do not need to hold every name, every region, every catastrophe and narrow escape. If you wish, you can let the details of Shurima's sand-bright ruins and Targon's star-crowned peaks and the Freljord's frozen watchers blur at the edges until they are no more than the sense of a vast interconnected world where each choice is a spell, and every spell carries a story and a cost. Memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into, and you are allowed to set these ones gently back on the shelf. Before you drift into dreams, you might keep only a single thread, that the world is not static, and neither are its spirits, and neither are you. If your eyes grow heavy, you can slip away at any time. If you feel awake, you can stay with me a little longer. There will be no sharp ending here, only a gradual fade, a last quiet look over your shoulder at the mages and the lives they altered, before we offer a soft goodbye and a gentle reminder of how and when to return. So we stand here together at the edge of this long, quiet ranking, looking back over the footsteps we have left in the dust of Runeterra's history and in the soft glow of its present. You have walked beside star forgers and rune bearers, tyrants of pure arcane will, and hesitant guardians who fear their own hands. And whether you listened to every name, or simply let these mages drift past as a distant murmur, your presence has shaped this little story. Breathe slowly now, and let that sink in for a moment, that you shared your evening with Rise and his burden of world runes, with Aurelion's soul and his careless constellation making, with Syndra's storm of emotion and Zerath's sun-forged shattering, even if only as shadows at the edge of your awareness. If you stayed awake for every detail, I'm grateful. If you slipped in and out of sleep, letting the words become a gentle backdrop, I'm just as grateful. Memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into, and this one will wait for you whenever you return. If this slow descent through power and consequence soothed you, or stirred some quiet curiosity, you already know the small rituals that help this kind of work continue. A simple like, a quiet subscription, a soft share with another lore-loving, sleepy summoner who might need a companion in the dark hours. None are required. All are welcome. Support is a spell of its own, modest in gesture, but capable of summoning more nights like this. More walks through corners of the world we rarely see in the noise of battle. Where once we moved quickly from champion to champion, now we can imagine going deeper, where a single mage fills an entire evening, Rise alone, tracing the scars of the rune wars across maps and memories. Syndra, from frightened child to unfettered storm. Zerath, the moment before the sun disk cracked, and the silence after. Or perhaps we turn our lantern outward, toward a region by region demon ecology, listening for the whisper of fear in Demacia, the taste of ambition in Noxus, the thin line between harmony and hunger in Ionia. You might even guide the next path yourself, with comments that shape a community rank return to these towers of power. Before you drift into dreams, let one last image settle behind your eyes. Night has folded itself over Runeterra. In Shurima, the sands are cooling, and somewhere beneath them, Zerath's light dims to a patient ember. In a hidden chamber, Rise rests at last, the world runes quiet in their seals, their colours muted, their terrible songs reduced to a faint, almost forgotten hum. High above, Aurelion's soul turns away, for once content to let these stars burn without his hand. The sky he forged glitters like scattered wards keeping watch over sleeping fields. Across the Freljord, tents and frost-rimmed towers hold mages who dream of ancient watchers, still frozen below, their reality-warping thoughts momentarily still. In Ionia, a girl of impossible power might be awake, or might be sleeping. Her spheres circling in slow, drowsy orbits. Some of these spellcasters lie in peaceful slumber. Some read by candlelight. Some stare at the horizon and wonder what their power has cost. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits, and neither are they. And you sit or lie somewhere far from them, yet closer than you think, because story is a bridge, and emotion is the river beneath it. When you are ready, you can let the screen go dark, leaving Runeterra to its own midnight, and carrying only a small fragment of its magic with you into your own night. There is no need for a sharp farewell, just a slow exhale, a last lingering glance at this sleeping world of mages. And then, when it feels right, you may simply go. And yet, you are still here. You linger at the edge of the campfire, where the light thins and the shadow grows gentle, listening not to the grand declarations of gods and world runes, but to the soft crackle of what remains after the story is done. Breathe slowly now, because what follows is not a tale of terror, but a quieter kind of question, the sort that waits until most of the crowd has drifted away, leaving only you, the embers, and a world of magic settling back into silence. In a place like Runeterra, where Rise walks alone with the weight of civilization in his pack, where Syndra's raw emotion once swelled so wildly it could have erased an island, and where Aurelion's soul forges stars as easily as others light candles, power is not an abstract idea. It is a way of life and a burden of memory. Where once the rune wars tore reality open, and where once the watchers pressed their will against the ice, the present is stitched together by those who dare to touch that same fire, and those who choose to live in its shadow instead. So I will ask you, softly, before you drift into dreams, in that world, who would you be? Would you reach for the highest rung and name yourself beside the Titans? A Rise or an Aurelion, rewriting the sky at the cost of ever-present fear, that one misstep could unmake everything you love? Would you prefer a simple, unlit life beneath them? A farmer in Dalmatia or a dockhand in Bilgewater, watching the distant flare of spells the way others watch storms, hoping they never come too close? Or perhaps you feel the pull of something in between, like that pilt-over watchmaker who chooses small, careful magic, a single glowing gear or a warded spring hidden in the heart of a clock, shaping minutes instead of continents, accepting that memories are treasures to visit, not homes to move into. The world is not static, and neither are its spirits. Where once only cataclysms mattered, now a quiet life, with one deliberate spell, can still bend a story's path. If you wish, answer with only a word or a short phrase, a secret token in the comments below. Rise. Watchmaker. Aurelion. No magic. Nothing more is required. To most, it will look like a stray whisper, a fragment of emotion without context. But those who sat beside you at this late hour will recognize it as a shared sign that they too stayed until the last rune dimmed. I do read those late fragments, when the world is quiet. Sometimes a single word there becomes a hidden inscription on a prop, a half-seen name in a ledger, or the seed of a micro-story woven between greater legends, so that your choice in this small moment ripples outward into futures you have not yet seen. For now, let the sound fall away, and let the image fade like the last ember of a spell, cooling in the dark. Leave your one word behind you, if you wish, and know that somewhere, in a script not yet written, it may be waiting to answer back.